Welcome back to Azkaban. Today's story: what if Snape discovered he was Harry's real father through a bloodline scan? Before we dive in, take a moment to smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so the next tale always finds you. Alright, let's begin. Chapter 1, the lineage panel. The thing about the dungeons in October was that the cold arrived before the calendar admitted it. Harry felt it climbing the stone the way damp climbs a wall, slow and patient, settling into the joints of his fingers as he ground the dried beetle carapace into the powder Snape had demanded by the end of the period. His mortar scraped. Across the bench, Ron muttered something uncharitable about how no other teacher made them suffer like this, which was nearly true, and Harry, who had once been able to imagine a kinder face at the front of this room, had long since given up the habit. 3 turns counterclockwise after the powder is fine, Snape said from the front, not looking up from the essays bleeding red under his quill. Anyone who adds it while it is still coarse will produce a sludge fit only for the destruction of cauldrons, which several of you appear determined to achieve. Harry kept grinding. His head had been wrong all morning, a low pressure behind the eyes, the kind that came after a night of the dreams he did not report to anyone. He had not slept. He rarely slept properly now, not since June, not since the graveyard and the cold and the thing that had crawled back into a body and looked at him with red eyes and called him by his name. Harry Potter, it had said, almost tender, the way a person says a name he has waited a long time to say. He shook the thought off and tipped the powder into the cauldron. He would not be able to say, afterward, exactly what went wrong. He had measured the powder. He was almost certain he had measured the powder. But the potion, which ought to have settled into a pale violet, went the wrong color, a green that was nearly black, the green of a bruise 3 days old, and then it did something potions were not meant to do. It reached for him. A tendril of vapor rose, thin and deliberate, and instead of dispersing it bent toward Harry's face and slid into his nose and mouth before he understood that he should hold his breath. The room tilted. Ron's voice came from very far away, saying his name, and then a clatter that was Harry's stool going over, and then the floor, the cold flagstones taking the side of his head, and the last thing he registered with any clarity was the sound of robes moving fast across stone, faster than he had ever heard Snape move, and a hand gripping his jaw and forcing his mouth open. "Idiot child," Snape said, and there was something in the words that was not the usual contempt, something closer to fear, though Harry was too far gone to name it. "Do not swallow, do you hear me? Do not." Weasley, the bezoar from the 3rd shelf, the third, not the dark, came up and took him. He woke to white. The hospital wing ceiling had a water stain near the 3rd arch that Harry knew intimately, the way a person comes to know the cracks in a hospital ceiling, as he had come to know this room across 5 years of returning to it, broken in some new and inventive fashion. He lay still and let the room assemble itself. The cold smell of the dungeons had been replaced by the cleaner sharpness of dittany and something herbal steaming on the bedside table. His throat felt scoured. His tongue tasted of copper and ash. There were voices. He kept his eyes mostly shut and listened, because 5 years had taught him that the things people said over his unconscious body were more honest than the things they said to his face. "I have never seen a reaction propagate like that." Madam Pomfrey, brisk but pitched low. "It was not a poison, Severus. I would stake my license on it. It behaved like a poison, but the moment the bezoar touched his lips it should have stopped, and it did not stop. Something in him kept answering it." The potion was a standard draft. Snape's voice, flat, controlled, the control of a person holding a lid down on a pot. First years could brew it without incident. He did not misbrew it badly enough to produce a toxin of that order. The error was elsewhere. Then where? A silence. Harry heard the squeak of a quill, the rustle of parchment. "I am running a full diagnostic," Pomfrey said. "Magical core, residual exposure, the lot. If there is something interfering with his magic, I want it on parchment before I send a single owl to St. Mungo's. Hold the lamp." Harry decided he had eavesdropped enough to be caught honestly, and opened his eyes, and groaned, because his head felt like a bell that had recently been rung. "Ah," Pomfrey's face appeared above him, lined and competent and unsurprised. "Back with us, don't try to sit up. You've had a draft of something that did not want to be friends with you, and your throat will be raw for a day. Can you tell me your name?" "Harry," he rasped. "Harry Potter. I always know my name, I just don't always like it." A snort that might have been from Pomfrey and might have been from the dark shape standing at the foot of the bed with its arms folded, a shape Harry's eyes resolved with a familiar sinking into Snape. The professor's face gave away nothing. It never did, but he had not left. That was the detail Harry would turn over later in the small hours. Snape had not left the hospital wing, had stayed past any duty, was standing there in the lamplight with the particular stillness of a person who has decided not to be anywhere else. "The diagnostic," Pomfrey said, and tapped her wand against a long strip of pale parchment laid out on the trolley beside the bed. "Lie still, this won't hurt, it reads what's there." She passed the wand the length of him, slow, from crown to heel, and the parchment began to fill itself in a cramped healer's script that scrolled and corrected and scrolled again. Lines of it, columns, the running ledger of a body. Harry watched it without much interest. He had been read by diagnostic charms a dozen times. They always said the same dull things. Subject malnourished in early childhood. Old fracture left wrist improperly set. Residual exposure to dark magic, see line 40. The story of him in clinical hand. Pomfrey watched it too, and her watching changed. He saw the change before he understood it. Her quill, which had been keeping pace, stopped. Her eyes went back up a line, and then another, the way eyes go back over a sentence that has refused to mean what it ought to mean. The color moved out of her face in a way that had nothing to do with the lamplight. "That cannot be right," she said very quietly to herself, and tapped the parchment again to make it rerun the relevant section, which it did, and which produced the same result, because diagnostic charms have no opinions and no mercy. "Poppy," Snape had unfolded his arms. "What does it say? Give me a moment. What does it say?" Pomfrey looked up at him, and whatever was in her face made Snape come around the foot of the bed, fast, as he had crossed the dungeon, and put his hand on the parchment to turn it toward himself, and read. Harry, propped on the pillows, watched a thing he had never once in 5 years seen happen. He watched Severus Snape stop, not pause. Stop the whole machinery of him, as though some central gear had been pulled. The professor read the parchment and read it again, and his hand on the edge of the trolley went white at the knuckle, and he said nothing at all, which from Snape was louder than any shout. "What?" Harry pushed himself up despite Pomfrey's hand. "What does it say? Is it, am I, is something?" He could think of 100 terrible things a diagnostic might find. He had a cursed scar that bled red eyes into his sleep. He could believe almost anything of his own blood. "Just tell me." Snape did not tell him. Snape was not, in that moment, capable of telling him anything. So it was Pomfrey who drew the parchment back, gently, the way you take a sharp thing from a child, and folded the lower portion over so the columns of the ordinary body were hidden, and left visible only the section that had stopped them both, the section that read in the charm's indifferent hand. Maternal line, Lily J. Evans Potter, deceased. Confirmed. Paternal line, glamour detected. Paternity charm, 3rd tier, decaying. True signature beneath. Recorded sire, James F. Potter, deceased. False. Underlying signature, Severus T. Snape, living. Confidence, absolute. Harry read it twice. The words did not rearrange themselves into sense. He read false, and the word sat there in the charm's flat capitals and refused to be a mistake. He read Severus T. Snape, living, and his eyes went up of their own accord to the figure standing rigid beside the bed, the teacher he had hated comfortably for 5 years, the teacher who had hated him back, and the room did the slow tilt it had done in the dungeon, except this time he had not swallowed anything. "That's wrong," Harry said. His voice came out small and even, which surprised him. It's broken, the charm's broken, from the potion, it scrambled something." "Diagnostic charms do not scramble," Pomfrey said, and her gentleness was the worst part. "They read what is. The potion did not poison you, Harry. It interfered with a piece of magic that was already inside you, a glamour over your blood." She had to stop and gather herself, a healer of 40 years standing, and start again. "It has been decaying for some time, I think. As you come into your full magic, charms laid in early childhood begin to fail. The potion accelerated it. That is why it answered you. It was not attacking. It was the glamour tearing. James Potter is my father." Harry heard himself say it the way you say a fact you have always been allowed to keep. "My dad, there are photographs. I look like him. Everyone says I look just like him." "You look," Snape said, and stopped, and the silence after the 2 words went on so long that Harry thought he would not continue. When he did, the voice had been scraped down to something quiet and terrible. "You look like your mother about the eyes. Everyone has always been content to stop looking at the eyes." It was not an answer. It was worse than an answer. "This is mad." Harry's hands had found fistfuls of the blanket. "You hate me. You've hated me since I was 11 years old. You hated my dad, you hate me. I've sat in your classroom for 5 years and you've never once." The sentence had nowhere to go. He let it drop. "It's a mistake." "Yes," Snape said, "it is a mistake. It has always been a mistake." But he was not looking at Harry when he said it, and Harry could not tell then what kind of mistake Snape meant. Pomfrey rolled the parchment and held it against her chest, both arms crossed over it. "No one," she said, "leaves this wing repeating any of what is written here. Not to a friend, not to a portrait, not to the headmaster, not until I understand what I am looking at and what laying it bare would do to this child's protection. Severus. Are you listening to me? I hear you. I mean it." There are wards on this boy's life that I do not pretend to understand the half of, and a glamour this old, this deep, was put there by someone who meant it to hold. We pull the wrong thread and we do not know what unravels, so we say nothing to anyone. She looked at Harry. Including you, Mr. Potter, especially you. You will go back to your dormitory and you will tell your friends the potion made you ill, which is true, and you will let me do my work. My friends will know I'm lying, Harry said. Hermione always knows. Then lie to Hermione, Pomfrey said, and feel guilty about it later, which I am told is the natural condition of adolescence. She bustled off toward her office to seal the parchment in something, and for a moment Harry was alone with Snape, the two of them in the lamplight, and neither of them able to look at the other, two people who had just been handed the same unwanted fact and had no idea what to do with their hands. I don't believe it, Harry said low, so Pomfrey would not hear. Whatever that thing says, nor do I, Snape said. Good, it is not good. Snape's eyes came to him then, dark and flat and giving away nothing, except that they came to him, which they had never quite done before, never landed and stayed. It is not good, Potter, because the charm is correct. I knew it the moment I read it. I have spent 15 years not knowing a thing, and I knew it in one line of a healer's scrawl, and that is how I am certain. You may believe what comforts you. I no longer have that luxury. And he turned, robes snapping, and was gone through the doors before Harry could find a single word to throw after him. Harry did not sleep. He lay in the hospital bed and watched the water stain near the third arch and thought about James Potter, who had died with his wand in another room so that Harry's mother could carry Harry up the stairs. James Potter, who had laughed in every photograph. James Potter, whose name Harry had carried like a shield through 5 years of a world that wanted things from him. Recorded sire, James F. Potter, false. He turned the word over and could not make it stop being a knife. If the charm was right, then James had not been his father. And if James had not been his father, then everyone who had ever told Harry he had his father's eyes, his father's nerve, his father's gift on a broom, had been telling him the truth about a stranger. Sirius, Remus, Hagrid, weeping in a hut on a rock in the sea. Your mum and dad were good people, Harry. Had Sirius known, had any of them. And if Snape was his father, Harry made himself form the sentence, all the way to the end, because he had learned that the things he refused to look at were the things that ambushed him in the dark. If Snape was his father, then Snape had stood at the front of a classroom for 5 years and looked at his own son and called him arrogant, mediocre, a celebrity coasting on a dead man's name, and had meant every word. That was the part Harry could not get past, not the blood, the cruelty. You did not do that to your child, you could not, unless you did not know. He sat with that one a long time. I have spent 15 years not knowing a thing. Snape had not been lying. Harry had spent enough hours hating Snape to know the precise texture of his lies, the cold, polished surface of them, and this had not been that. This had been a person standing in the wreckage of his own certainty, saying the only true thing he had left. Toward dawn Harry slept after all, badly, and dreamed of a corridor and a door he could not open, which was at least a familiar misery, and woke to grey light and Hermione sitting in the visitor's chair with her arms folded and an expression that meant she had decided something. Pomfrey says it was a bad potions reaction, Hermione said without preamble. She says you'll be fine by tomorrow. Ron's beside himself, by the way. He thinks it was his fault because he was the one who got you the Bezoar, and he thinks he got the wrong shelf, and I've told him 11 times that Snape said he got the right shelf, but you know Ron. She paused. Her eyes went over Harry's face the way Pomfrey's had gone over the parchment. Harry, what actually happened? A bad potions reaction, Harry said. You're lying. I'm not. You are. You've got the face you get when you're carrying something. You had it all last summer about the dreams before you told us. She leaned forward. I'm not going to push. I'm just going to sit here and let you decide that telling me is easier than not telling me, because it always is, and we both know it. It was a tactic she had refined over 5 years, and it worked, as it always worked, because Hermione Granger was the only person Harry knew who could make patience feel like an interrogation. But he had given Pomfrey his word, and more than that, he did not have language yet for the thing in the rolled parchment. He did not know how to put Snape and father in the same sentence and have it come out as anything but a joke or a wound. There's something, he admitted, because lying to her completely had never once worked and he was tired. There is something, and I can't tell you yet because I don't understand it, and because someone made me promise, and because if I say it out loud right now I think I'll come apart. But I will. I'll tell you when I can. Just give me a few days, please. Hermione studied him. Whatever she saw made her sit back, and her face, which had been braced for a fight, softened into something he liked better and trusted more. All right, she said, a few days. But Harry, if it's something dangerous, if it's about him, about you-know-who and the scar, you can't sit on that, you have to. It's not the scar, Harry said. I promise it's not the scar. And that at least was true, and the truth of it must have shown, because she let it go and changed the subject to the mountain of work he had missed, which was the kindest thing she could have done, and Harry let her bury him in it. Ron came after lessons, and Ron was a different kind of difficult, because Ron did not interrogate. Ron carried things in his shoulders and would not put them down until you made him. He arrived with Harry's bag and a fistful of liberated treacle from the kitchens and the hunched look of a person who had rehearsed an apology. "I got the wrong shelf," Ron said, before he had even sat down. "I keep going over it. You went gray, mate, you went gray like I've never seen anyone go that color, and I grabbed for the bezoar and there's 3 shelves and I just grabbed, and I've been telling myself I got the 3rd one, but what if I didn't, what if Snape said you got the right one." Harry pushed himself up against the pillows. He said it out loud in front of the whole room. "When does Snape ever let a Gryffindor off a thing he could pin on us?" "Never," Ron admitted, "never." "So if he said you got it right, you got it right. The bezoar wasn't the problem." Harry heard the truth of that land in his own chest and had to look away from it. It was a reaction. Something in the potion and something in me that didn't agree. Nothing you did, nothing anyone could have stopped. Ron sat down at last, the apology let go, and ate one of the stolen sweets, and was quiet a moment in the way that meant he was working up to the part he actually cared about. "You scared me," he said finally, to the blanket rather than to Harry. "That's all. You go off having visions and getting yourself half killed about once a term, and I always think, this is the one, this is the time it doesn't fix. So, don't," he cleared his throat, "and eat the treacle, it's better than the Madam Pomfrey gives you." It was, Harry thought, the most honest thing anyone had said to him all day, and the easiest to bear, because it asked nothing of him except that he go on being alive, which was a thing he could manage. He ate the treacle. Ron talked about the Chudley cannons and their bottomless capacity for losing. The afternoon went gray and then dark at the windows, and for a little while Harry was only a boy in a hospital bed with his best friend lying to him about Quidditch scores to make him laugh, and the parchment and its impossible capitals belonged to some other person 2 floors down, whose problems were not his. The trouble was that they were his. He felt the weight of them the moment Ron left, the moment the door swung shut and the ward went quiet, and there was no one to perform ordinariness for. He lay back and let himself feel how tired he was, not in the body, in the place underneath the body, the place that had been holding the line since June, and was very near the end of what it could hold. 2 floors down and a corridor over, in an office that smelled of cold smoke and pickled things in jars, Severus Snape sat at his desk and did not move for a very long time. He had not slept either. He had returned from the hospital wing and locked his door and sat, and the candle had burned down and he had not replaced it. And now the early light came gray through the high slit window and laid itself across the parchment he had taken, stolen if one were precise, and Severus was always precise, from a healer's trolley while her back was turned. He had read it 40 times. The reading did not change it. Underlying signature, Severus T. Snape, living, confidence, absolute. The charm did not deal in confidence below the absolute. He knew the spell. He had used it himself in another life to confirm the lineage of ingredients whose provenance a buyer had lied about. It did not err. It could not be bribed. It read the blood and reported what the blood was, and the blood said that the child upstairs, the child he had spent 5 years despising for the crime of having a dead father's face, was his. Severus put his hand flat on the desk and watched it, because it was not quite steady, and he did not care for the information. There had been a summer. He had let himself, over the years, sand it down to nothing, file it under the long catalogue of things he did not permit himself to remember, but it had been real, and it sat in him now fully restored, the way a drowned thing comes up whole. The summer before everything. Lily 17, furious at the world and at James Potter and at Severus too, but not too furious for the river, for the long grass, for the weeks when the war had not yet swallowed the last of their childhood. He had loved her since he was 9 years old. He had gone on loving her after she stopped loving him, after the word he had thrown at her in front of everyone, the word he would have given his right hand to call back. But there had been that summer before the word, before James, a few weeks when she had loved him too, and he had told no one, and she had told no one, and then it had ended the way it ended, and he had assumed, with the bleak economy he applied to all his own joys, that it had simply ended. He counted. He was very good at arithmetic. It was the only branch of mathematics a potioneer could not do without. He counted backward from a birthday he knew to the month, because the whole of Britain knew it, the 31st of July, the boy who lived, and he counted the months, and the months landed where they landed, and the breath went out of him. She had known, she must have known. She had married Potter in the autumn, and the child had come in July, and she had let the whole world, and Severus most of all, believed that the child was Potter's and she had done it on purpose, because Lily Evans did nothing by accident. Lily Evans had been the most deliberate human being he had ever known. A flare of something went through Severus then, and he recognized it with disgust as anger at a dead woman, the one luxury he had always refused himself, and he crushed it, because anger at the dead was the act of a coward, and because under the anger where he could not crush it was the other thing. The thing he had no name for. He had spent 15 years believing that the only piece of Lily left in the world was a pair of green eyes in a face that was otherwise Potter's, a daily insult he had to look at and grade and pretend not to look at. And now he was being told that the eyes were not the only piece, that there was more of her in the world than he had let himself want, that it had been sitting in the third row of his classroom for 5 years, hating him and right to hate him. He could not hold the shape of it. So he did what he had always done with things he could not hold. He stood and washed his face in the cold basin and put on the armor of the day and went to teach, and was vicious to a fourth year for melting a cauldron, and the fourth year cried, and Severus felt nothing about it, because feeling things had never once helped him, and he saw no reason to begin in his 36th year. Between the morning and afternoon classes, he locked the office and laid the stolen parchment flat under the lamp and read the glamour notation properly, with the cold attention he gave to a brewing log, because if he treated it as a problem in his discipline, he could keep his hands from shaking over it. Paternity charm, third tier decaying. He knew the family of charm. A first-tier glamour painted the surface, hair, the cast of a jaw, the things a portrait could fake. A second reached into the lesser blood. A third went to the marrow, rewrote the signature a wand read when it read a wizard's line, the thing the old families paid to have confirmed before they let a stranger marry a daughter. A third-tier paternity charm was not vanity. It was the kind of working one used to make a lie survive scrutiny by goblins, by healers, by the ministry's own quills. It was the kind of working that took a master and a master's time, and a master's certainty that the deception would need to outlive everyone who might have contested it. It had a signature of its own, that was the thing. All deep magic did, a working that complex left the fingerprints of the hand that cast it, smudged but present, the way a brewer could taste whose still a fire whiskey had come off. Severus passed his wand over the notation and coaxed the residue up, and what rose was faint, decades faint, decaying with the charm it belonged to, but it was there, a flavor he knew as well as he knew his own, patient, layered. Built to be kind on its surface and unbreakable underneath. He had tasted that signature on the wards of this castle and on the lock of the headmaster's door and on 100 small protections laid over 100 years of students, and recognizing it did nothing to his face because nothing did, but his hand went still on the desk and stayed still a long time. He did not let himself conclude it. A residue was not a confession. A flavor was not proof a court would hear, and Severus had learned in the worst school in the world never to act on a thing he could not put past doubt. He needed proof that could not be argued with, not a healer's charm, which a clever man could call corrupted, not a residue he alone could read. He needed the one test in Britain that no wizard could buy or bully, sworn by creatures who held wizarding sentiment in open contempt and would not lie to spare anyone's feelings. He needed Gringotts. The thought arrived fully formed, and he set it aside to ripen, because it was not a thing one did between classes, and because he was not yet ready to stand in a stone hall and watch a goblin confirm in a ledger the thing he already knew in his marrow. At lunch he did not go to the great hall. He went instead to the long gallery on the 4th floor where the portraits of dead headmasters had no jurisdiction, and he stood at a window and watched the grounds and the lake going steel-colored under a low sky, and he thought about what Pomfrey had said. A glamour this old, this deep, was put there by someone who meant it to hold. Someone had laid a paternity charm over the blood of a year-old infant. Someone had reached into the magic of a child and rewritten the most fundamental fact of him, recorded sire, James F. Potter, false where there should have been truth, and had built it deep enough to last 15 years, and had told no one, and had let Severus Snape walk past his own son 10,000 times in ignorance, and had let that son grow up believing himself the orphan of a man who had despised the very name of Snape. There were not many in the world who could lay a charm of that order over a living child and have it hold past the caster's death, or in defiance of the parent's knowledge. There were not many with the access to a year-old Potter in the chaos after the First War, when the child had been spirited away to who knew where under whose protection. Severus could, in fact, count the people capable of it and positioned for it on the fingers of one hand, and when he had finished counting he was left with a single name, and the name made the cold gallery colder. He did not say it aloud. The portraits were 2 corridors off, but Severus Snape had not survived 2 masters by saying names aloud in stone building. He only stood at the window and let the name sit behind his teeth and watched the lake, and understood that the careful architecture of his loyalty, the thing he had built his ruined life around, the one man he had trusted past all reason because that man had promised to protect the last living piece of Lily, that architecture had a crack in it now that ran straight to the foundation. The last living piece of Lily. He had said it himself years ago in this castle to that man, and that man had looked at him with those blue eyes full of weather and had agreed to protect the child, and had let Severus believe his only stake in the child was the memory of a woman. Had let him believe it. Had needed him to believe it, because a man grieving a dead love could be steered, and a man who knew he had a living son, a man like that could not be steered at all. Severus put his forehead against the cold glass for a moment, just one, where no one could see, and then he straightened and went back down to the dungeons and taught his afternoon classes and gave nothing away, because giving nothing away was the only thing he had ever been truly good at, and he had a feeling he was going to need every scrap of that skill before this was finished. That evening Harry was released from the hospital wing, with a vial of something foul to take if his throat closed in the night and strict instructions to eat properly, which Pomfrey delivered while not quite meeting his eyes, and which told Harry that whatever was on that parchment had not stopped frightening her. He went down to dinner because not going to dinner would have provoked questions, and he sat at the Gryffindor table between Ron and Hermione and pushed food around a plate and tried not to look at the high table. He failed. He looked at the high table the way you look at a wound you have been told not to touch. Dumbledore's chair was empty. The headmaster was away again, on the ministry business that took him away more and more this term, and Umbridge sat in pink to the left, neat and toad pale, and watching the hall with the flat satisfaction of a woman cataloguing. And at the far end apart Snape ate without appearing to taste anything, his eyes on the middle distance, and once, only once, across the whole noisy length of the great hall, his gaze flicked to the Gryffindor table and found Harry, and held for less than a second before it moved on. It was nothing. To anyone watching it was nothing, a teacher's idle glance. But Harry had spent 5 years on the receiving end of that gaze, and he knew its weather, and this had not been contempt. He did not have a word for what it had been. Something had changed in it, the way a familiar room is changed by being seen at a different hour, everything in the same place and nothing the same. "You're not eating," Hermione said. "Throat hurts," Harry said, which was true, and ate 3 more bites to prove the lie of the larger evasion, and Ron started in about Quidditch, and Harry let the ordinary noise of his life close over the top of him. He met Snape that night, which neither of them had planned and neither of them could have avoided. It happened on the stairs between the entrance hall and the first landing, the wide ones that liked to shift their banisters when you were not watching. Harry had gone back for a textbook left in the library and was coming up alone. The castle emptied into its after-hours hush, the torches guttering low, and Snape was coming down with an armful of stoppered vials bound for the hospital wing, and they arrived at the same half-landing at the same moment and stopped 3 feet apart, with nowhere for either of them to be but there. For a moment neither spoke. Harry had imagined in the hospital bed all the things he might say to this man if he ever had to say anything at all, and every one of them deserted him. Snape looked older in the low light, the lines of him deeper, the black eyes unreadable as ever, and Harry found himself doing the thing he had refused to do in the great hall, looking for himself in another person's face. The nose was wrong, the coloring was wrong, the whole grim architecture of the professor was nothing like the laughing boy in the Potter photographs, but the brow was not wrong, the way the frown sat. Harry had seen that exact line between his own eyebrows in 100 mirrors and never thought a thing of it, and now he could not stop seeing it, and he hated that he could not stop. "Professor," Harry said, because the silence had become its own kind of unbearable. "Potter," Snape's voice was perfectly level. "You are out of your dormitory after hours. I was in the library. I've got a note from Pomfrey. She said the walking would help my chest. I am aware of what Madam Pomfrey said." A pause waited, the vials clinking faintly in the dark. "How is your throat?" It was such an ordinary question, and so completely unlike anything Severus Snape had ever asked him, that Harry could not answer it for a second. He had been braced for cruelty or for the cold nothing the professor wore at the high table. He had not been braced for "How is your throat?" delivered in that flat, careful voice, the voice of a person stepping around something breakable in the dark. "Sore," Harry said, "better than yesterday." "Good." Snape did not move past him. He stood with his vials and looked at Harry, and Harry looked back, and the thing that had no name moved between them on the dim stairs, enormous and unspoken, the size of 15 years. "You will say nothing," Snape said at last, very quietly. to anyone. Whatever you imagine you understand about what was written, you understand a fraction of it, and the wrong word in the wrong corridor of this castle could undo protections you do not know you depend upon. Do you comprehend me? Pomfrey already told me to keep my mouth shut, then for once in your life heed instruction, but there was no venom in it. It came out tired, almost gentle, a person too exhausted to perform his own contempt. He shifted the vials and made to go past, and then he stopped, level with Harry, close enough that Harry could see the gray threading the black at his temple, and for a moment it looked as though Snape would say something else, something that cost more than a warning. He did not. Whatever it was went back down behind his teeth, where he kept everything. "Go to bed, Potter," he said, and went on down the stairs, his footsteps fading into the dark of the entrance hall, and Harry stood on the half-landing a long time before he climbed the rest of the way. It was nothing again, a teacher catching a student out of bounds. But Harry carried it up to Gryffindor Tower like a stone in his pocket, the how is your throat, turning it and turning it, because in 5 years no adult who was supposed to be responsible for him had ever asked after his hurts in a corridor at night with no audience to perform kindness for, and the one who finally had was the last person on earth Harry would have chosen. But later, much later, when the dormitory had gone quiet and Ron's snores had settled into their familiar rhythm, Harry lay awake in the dark with the hangings drawn and took the thing out and looked at it properly, as he had not let himself in daylight. He had a father. That was the part nobody had said out loud, because everyone in that hospital wing had been too busy being horrified by which father. But underneath the horror was a fact Harry had not held in his hands since he was a year old. Somewhere in the castle, 2 floors down, there was a living person whose blood he shared. Not a photograph, not a name on a grave he had never seen, not a story other people told him about himself. A person breathing in a cold office that smelled of smoke, who had read a healer's parchment and gone white to the knuckle, and said the charm is correct in a voice scraped down to nothing. It was the worst possible person. Harry was not confused about that. The blood did not erase one single hour of 5 years, did not turn one cruel word into kindness, did not make the person 2 floors down anything other than the teacher who had tormented him and Neville and half the school for sport. Harry was not going to be stupid about this. He was not going to let himself want anything from Severus Snape, because wanting things from people was how you got them taken away, and Harry had a lifetime of evidence on that point filed in a cupboard under a staircase in Surrey. And yet, in the dark, where no one could see and he did not have to defend it to anyone, including himself, Harry let the fact be a fact. I have a father and he is alive. He turned it over and found that it was not entirely only horror. There was a thin cold thread of something else running through it, something he was too suspicious to name and too honest to deny, and he lay in the dark and held the parchment of it and did not sleep, and 2 floors down a candle burned in a dungeon office where another person was doing exactly the same thing. The 2 of them awake on opposite ends of the same impossible sentence, neither willing to be the first to call it true. Outside, the October rain came on at last and ran down the high windows, and the castle held its 1,000 secrets in the dark, and at least one of them had begun, very quietly, to come undone. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. What the goblins keep. Severus told the headmistress's office, which is to say Umbridge, that he required a day's absence to source ingredients that could not be ordered by Owl, and Umbridge looked at him over her stack of educational decrees with the expression of a woman deciding whether a thing was worth the trouble of suspecting, and granted it, because even she had not yet found a way to make potions out of nothing. He signed her ledger. He let her believe she had inconvenienced him. He had spent 20 years letting powerful and stupid people believe they had the better of him, and there was a grim comfort in the familiarity of it, like the fit of an old coat worn through at the elbows. Then he went to London. Diagon Alley in the grey of a weekday morning was thin of custom, the shutters half down, the gilt sign over Gringotts catching what little light the sky allowed. Severus climbed the white steps past the bronze doors and the warning carved into them about thieves and what the bank kept for them, and did not read it, because he had read it 1,000 times and because he was not here to steal. He was here for something worse. He was here to have a thing confirmed that he would have given a great deal to keep merely suspected. The goblin at the high counter did not look up until Severus had stood before it long enough to make the not looking up a statement. Yes, it said. I require an inheritance assay, Severus said. Full lineage, the blood quill right, not the parchment charm. I will pay the rights fee and the surcharge for discretion. That made the goblin look up. The parchment charm was what healers used and what fathers used and what suspicious in-laws used. It was the common test, the one that had betrayed everything in the hospital wing. The blood quill right was older and goblin-sworn and admissible before the Wisengamot and the goblin courts both, and it cost a great deal, and it could not be undone or argued with or sealed away, and no wizard requested it lightly, because what it found became a matter of record in ledgers that outlived nations. You understand, the goblin said, that the right's findings are entered into the inheritance rolls. They cannot be expunged. Wizards come to us wishing the right and then wishing they had not wished it. I understand. Whose lineage? My own, Severus said, as it relates to a minor, Harry James Potter. If the name meant anything to the creature, it did not show it. Goblins did not trade, and the all-wizards felt for the child who had survived. It only made a note and named a price that would take a respectable bite out of Severus's modest savings, and Severus paid it without flinching and was led down, and down, through the cold and the rattle of the carts to a chamber Severus had not known existed beneath the bank, a low round room of black stone where a single goblin in the dark robes of the right waited beside a basin and a quill that was not a quill at all, but a sliver of something pale and sharp. The cart had gone deeper than any vault Severus had ever held, past the levels where the air still remembered daylight, down to where the rock sweated cold and the torches burned a green that was not flame. He had not been afraid, he was past the age and the temperament for that particular fear. But he had been aware, the whole rattling descent, of how far a person could be taken from the surface of his own life in the space of a few minutes, and of how little say he had once the cart began to move. It seemed to him an apt enough figure for the 2 days he had just lived through. Your hand, the right keeper said. He gave it. The sliver went into the pad of his thumb without ceremony and drew a bead of blood up the length of itself, dark in the lamplight, and the right keeper bled it into the basin where it met a clear liquid and bloomed, slow, into shapes Severus could not read, but the goblin plainly could. Then a second drop, drawn earlier, he understood now, from Harry himself, sent under seal from Hogwarts by a healer who had agreed to this much and no more, because Madam Pomfrey did not trust easily, but she trusted the law, and the goblin law would tell her whether to be frightened. The 2 bloods touched in the basin, and the chamber, which had been merely cold, grew colder, the way deep magic always announced itself. A drop in the air that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with attention, as though the old stone had turned to watch. The shapes resolved. The right keeper studied them a long moment, and then it lifted its eyes to Severus, and there was nothing in them, no pity, no judgment, only the flat certainty of a creature reporting a sum. The blood agrees, it said, sire and get. Confirmed by the right, witnessed and recorded. There is no glamour in this room strong enough to lie to it. It paused and made a sound that might have been the goblin equivalent of curiosity, dry as turning pages. There was a glamour, we see its shadow, a wizard's working laid over the child's recorded line. It is failing now, but the rolls remember what it tried to hide even when the wizard's parchments forgot. We always knew this child's father was not the one your kind wrote down. Severus stood very still in the black room. It was one thing to read it in a healer's scrawl in the chaos of a hospital wing. It was another to hear it spoken in a chamber built for truth by a creature that could not be moved to kindness or cruelty, either one, that simply said sire, and get the way it might say galleon and sickle, a fact of weights and measures. The child was his. There was no door left to walk back through. He had come to London hoping, somewhere beneath the part of himself that knew better, that the goblins would find the healer's charm corrupted, that he could go back to the clean old grief he understood, the grief of a man who had loved a woman and lost her and kept nothing. Instead, the goblins had handed him a son. You said, Severus heard himself say, and was distantly impressed that his voice came out level, that the rolls remember, that you knew. How long have your records held the true line? Since the child's first year of life, the right keeper said. The Potter vault passed to the child under the recorded name as wizard law required. But the inheritance rolls record blood, not names, and the blood was logged at the transfer, as it is always logged, and the blood did not match the name. We noted it. We do not correct the errors of wizards unasked. It is not our quarrel. We sealed the discrepancy and waited to be asked. You are the first to ask in 15 years. Who else knew the records held it? The one who placed the seal, the goblin said. A discrepancy of that nature does not seal itself. A wizard came in the child's first year with authority enough that the bank did not refuse him and asked that the matter be locked from casual view. We obliged. We are a bank. We seal what we are paid and warranted to seal. It tilted its head. He did not have the right undone. He could not, the right had not yet been performed, and he did not dare request it, for the right would have written the truth into the rolls in ink no seal could cover. He sealed the surface and trusted the surface to suffice. It sufficed for 15 years, the dry page-turning sound again, until you asked his name. That, the right keeper said, is sealed under the same warrant. I cannot give it, but the warrant carries a mark, and a wizard who knew the marks of the ministry and the great houses might recognize the hand that signed it. Inheritance Council could petition to break the seal before the Wisengamot with cause. It would not be cheap, and it would not be quiet. Severus did not need the name read to him. He had counted the people capable of it on the fingers of one hand and been left with one. And now a goblin had told him that one person had walked into this bank in the chaos after the war with authority. No goblin would refuse, and sealed the truth of a child's blood beneath a warrant. There was precisely one wizard in Britain who commanded that kind of trust from the goblins, and that kind of access to a year-old potter, and that kind of long, patient certainty that the deception would need to outlive everyone. Severus had served him for 14 years, had bled for him, had agreed in a hilltop graveyard of the heart to spend his life protecting a child he had been told was only the orphan of his dead love. "Thank you," Severus said, which was not a thing he often said, and meant it, which was rarer still. He took the deed of the right, the official copy, sealed and witnessed and admissible, and put it inside his robes against his chest where the healer's stolen parchment had been, and climbed back up into the grey morning of Diagon Alley, and stood on the white steps a moment with the thin London light on his face, a man who had walked into a bank believing he had nothing and walked out the father of a 15-year-old who hated him. He did not know what to do with his hands. He put them in his pockets, as he had not done since he was a schoolboy in robes too cheap for the cold, and walked, and did not go back to Hogwarts directly because he was not ready, and a man permitted himself, once a decade, the cowardice of an hour. Harry spent that same day learning that the world goes on being ordinary around you while the floor of it has fallen out. He went to lessons. He took notes he would not remember taking. In charms he made a goblet do nothing it was supposed to do, and Flitwick said not to worry, Mr. Potter, off color today, and Harry agreed that he was off color, which was the understatement of his life. At lunch Hermione watched him with the patient attention of a person waiting for a kettle, and Ron filled the silence with talk, and Harry was grateful for both of them in the helpless way you are grateful for people who keep you company in a grief they are not allowed to know about. Snape was not at the high table. Harry noticed it, as he now noticed everything about Snape, which was a new and unwelcome reflex, a compass needle dragging always to the same north. Snape was gone all day. Umbridge took his afternoon class herself and made them copy theory from the board in silence and confiscated 2 cauldrons for being improperly accounted. And Harry copied theory and thought, with a clarity that frightened him a little, I know where he's gone. He's gone to make certain. He's gone to find out if it's true. And underneath that, smaller and uglier and more honest, I hope it isn't. I hope he comes back and says it was a mistake after all. Because if it was a mistake, Harry could keep James. He could keep the laughing figure in the photographs, the one Sirius had loved, the one whose name was carved on a grave in Godric's Hollow that Harry had never visited but had built half of himself around. If it was true, then James was a kind stranger who had raised another wizard's son and died for him, which was its own enormous and unbearable thing, and Harry did not know yet whether it made James more of a father or less, and he was 15, and no one had ever taught him how to do arithmetic with the dead. He found, when he tried to picture James now, that the picture had grown a question mark over it, and the question mark was the cruelest part, because for 5 years James Potter had been the one solid fact Harry owned about where he came from, and now even that had gone soft at the edges. He had detention that evening, and the detention was Umbridge's. He had earned it the ordinary way, by contradicting her in front of the class, by saying out loud the thing the whole castle knew and was forbidden to say, and she had smiled her wide, wet smile and written him a week of evenings in her own hand. So Harry climbed to the pink office where the kittens mewed and turned on their painted plates and sat at the small table and was handed the thin black quill and a blank sheet, and told to write I must not tell lies until the message had, in her words, sunk in. There was no ink. He had learned that the first night. The quill drew its ink from him, scoring the words into the back of his right hand and feeding the cut back onto the parchment in his own blood, and the cut healed, mostly, between sessions, and reopened along the same lines the moment he began again, so that the words were beginning to stand on his skin in a pale, permanent script. I must not tell lies. He wrote it, and the back of his hand burned, and Umbridge sat behind her desk with her tea and her decrees, and watched him with the placid attention of a woman watering a plant. He did not make a sound. That was the only piece of it he controlled, and he held it with everything he had, because the not making a sound was the one thing she wanted that he could refuse her. He thought, while the quill bit, about the irony so sharp it was nearly funny. I must not tell lies, carved into a boy by a ministry that had spent 15 years living inside the largest lie of his life, ordered by a woman who served the men who had hidden his own blood from him. The whole world told him not to tell lies, and the whole world had been lying to him since before he could speak. He bled onto the parchment and held his silence and let the bleak comedy of it keep him company, because something had to. When she finally released him, the corridor outside was dark and empty, and Harry stood in it a moment, cradling his right hand against his chest, the words throbbing, and thought, with a flatness that frightened him more than the pain, that there was no adult in this castle he was permitted to tell. Not McGonagall, who would go to the headmaster. Not the headmaster who was away, and who, it was beginning to seem, was the architect of the largest deception in Harry's life. He pulled his sleeve down over the hand and went up to the tower and told no one, and that was the day he learned that the lesson Umbridge meant to teach him and the lesson he actually learned were not the same lesson at all. He told Hermione that evening. He had not planned to. They were alone in a corner of the common room, with Ron gone up to fetch a forgotten essay, the fire low, and Hermione said, not pushing, just present, "You don't have to," and Harry found that the not having to was exactly what undid him, and he told her. He told her about the potion and the diagnostic and the parchment. He told her the word false in the charm's flat capitals. He told her the name. He watched her face do the thing every face would do, the recoil, the disbelief, the rapid recalculation, and then he watched Hermione Granger pull herself together faster than anyone he knew, because her first instinct in the face of the impossible was not to feel but to understand, and understanding was a thing she trusted. "A third-tier paternity glamour," she said, very quietly, and Harry blinked, because he had not told her the tier. "That's Harry, that's not a thing you can do by accident, or do badly, or that's not number actually," and there it was, the fierce little word she used when her brain had caught a thread and refused to drop it. "Actually, I read about this last year for the thing on magical genealogy. There's a whole branch of law about blood glamours because the old families used to use them to legitimize heirs, or to hide the wrong ones, and it's been heavily restricted since the 1800s precisely because of cases like this. You cannot place a third-tier paternity charm on a child without the consent of a blood guardian or a Wisengamot warrant. It's not just frowned on. It's a criminal violation of the statute of lineage. Someone broke the law to do this to you, a serious law. Whoever they were, they had to either have your parents' consent, or my parents were dead," Harry said. "Or a warrant," Hermione finished, and the two of them sat with that, the fire ticking, because a warrant meant the ministry, or someone who could command the machinery that issued warrants, and there were not many of those, and Hermione's brilliant, frightened brain was arriving by its own road at the same single name Snape had arrived at in a cold gallery, and Harry watched her get there, and watched her not want to say it, as he had not wanted to say it. "He's away so much this term," Hermione said at last, not naming him, the way you do not name a thing in a castle full of portraits. "The headmaster, on ministry business. He placed you with the Dursleys. He's the one who, every summer, he sends you back there, and you've told him how it is and he sends you back anyway, and everyone always says it's because of the blood protection, your mother's blood, your aunt's blood, and I've never once asked whether the blood protection would it even still work if she stopped." Her hand had found Harry's sleeve. "It would," she said, answering her own question with the relief of a person who has checked their working. "It's maternal, it runs through Lily and Petunia, sisters, same blood, it doesn't care who your father was, so the protection is real, the protection holds either way, which means the glamour wasn't for that. The glamour wasn't protecting you, it was hiding something, from someone." "From him," Harry said, "from Snape." It was the first time he had said the name in this context out loud, Snape, my father, and it came out of him strange and metallic. He didn't know, you should have seen his face. He's the best liar I've ever met, Hermione. You don't survive what he survives without being, and that wasn't a lie. He found out the same second I did. Somebody kept it from him for 15 years, made him think there was nothing left." Hermione was quiet a moment, and when she spoke her voice had changed, gone gentler and more careful, the research voice set aside. "Harry, whatever Snape is, and he's been horrible to you, he's been genuinely cruel, I'm not going to pretend, but if someone took a child from him without his knowing and let him grieve, and used that grief, that's one of the worst things I can think of to do to a person. To both of you," she looked at the fire, "I think you should be careful of everyone, including the people we're told to trust the most, especially them." Ron came back down the stairs with his essay, complaining about Crookshanks sleeping on his quills, and the conversation folded itself away, and Harry sat with the fire and the new shape of the world, and found that telling Hermione had not made it lighter exactly, but had made it shared, and shared was a thing he could carry. Severus came back to Hogwarts after dark. He did not go to his office. He went instead by a route he knew that the portraits did not watch, to the hospital wing, where Madam Pomfrey was still awake among her sleeping charges with a lamp turned low, and he laid the goblin deed on her desk without a word and let her read it. She read it twice the way everyone read these things twice. When she set it down her hands were steady because she was Madam Pomfrey, and 40 years in this castle had given her hands that did not shake over other people's catastrophes, but her face had gone grave in a way Severus rarely saw on it. "So it is true," she said. "It is true, and the seal, the bank's seal on the records." She tapped the relevant line of the deed, where the right keeper's careful hand had noted the existence of the warrant without naming the warrant's author. A wizard with authority enough that the bank did not refuse him. In the child's first year, she looked up at Severus, and the two of them held a silence that was full of a name neither would say, two people who had given their working lives to the same institution and the same headmaster, and were arriving in a dim ward at midnight at the edge of a thing that would make those lives mean something other than what they had believed. "I have served him," Severus said. "Since before that child was born, I came to him with nothing. He gave me a reason to go on living, and the reason was her, and the protection of what little of her remained in the world. He let me believe that what remained was a pair of eyes in a stranger's face." His voice did not rise. It went the other way, down into the flat, cold register he used when a thing mattered too much to be permitted feeling. "He stood in his office and let me grieve a woman, and the whole time he knew that she had left more behind than her eyes. He knew I had a son, and he judged, Poppy, he sat in that office, and he judged that a grieving man would serve him better than a father, and he chose the grief. He chose to leave me the grief. You don't know that he reasoned it so coldly." "I know exactly how coldly he reasons," Severus said. "I have watched him reason. He moves people the way a chess player moves the pieces he is fondest of, with great tenderness and great regret and not 1 inch of hesitation. He is not cruel, that is what makes him dangerous. A cruel man you can predict. He is kind, and he is certain that his kindness sees further than yours, and he will break anything that he has decided needs breaking, and he will grieve while he breaks it, and the grieving will not stay his hand for a moment." He stopped. He had said more than he meant to. He always said more to Poppy than he meant to. She had set his bones too many times for him to keep all his armor on in her ward. "What will you do?" Pomfrey said. "I do not know." It cost him to say it. He was a man who always knew the next move. It was how he had stayed alive among people who killed for sport. "He is away. When he returns I will have it out with him. I will have the truth, all of it, the why and the how, and whether she, whether Lily." He could not finish that one. He left it. "And then I will decide what is owed and to whom, and I will collect it." "And your son?" Severus was quiet. "His son." The word still would not sit in his mouth without grinding against everything else. "He hates me," he said, "with cause. I have given him 15 years of cause, the last 5 of them with my own hand, knowing nothing, telling myself I was punishing the ghost of James Potter, and never once asking why a child's face could make me so unreasoning. So," he stopped. "I told myself it was the resemblance. I told myself I hated him because he looked like the husband who took her, and all along it was the opposite. All along some part of me knew and could not say what it knew, and turned it into venom because venom was the only shape I had ever found for the things I could not bear." He looked at his own hands. "I do not know how to undo that, Poppy. I do not know that it can be undone." "You do not unsay 5 years. "No," Pomfrey agreed, because she did not flatter and she did not lie to make a man feel better. It was why he had brought the deed to her and no one else. "You don't unsay them, but you're not dead, and neither is he, and that's more than most people in your position get. My professional advice, Severus, for whatever school nurse's advice is worth, is to stop trying to undo the past, which is the one thing in the universe even you can't brew a remedy for, and start being decent to him going forward today in small ways he won't trust, until one day he trusts them. That's all reconciliation ever is. It's not a grand scene. It's 1,000 small decencies that outlast the suspicion." She picked up the deed and handed it back to him. "Now go to bed. You've had the worst day of your life and you'll be no use to anyone running on temper and no sleep." He took the deed. He did not go to bed, but he went, which she would count as a victory, and she was not wrong about the small things. He would remember that she had said it later, when the small things were all he had. There was a potions lesson the next morning, before the summons, and it was the strangest hour Harry had spent in 5 years of Snape's classroom. The Gryffindors filed and braced, the way they always braced, shoulders up, eyes down, the posture a class learns when its teacher hunts for weakness. Snape took the register in the flat voice. He set the day's brew on the board. And then he moved among the cauldrons as he always did, and he was vicious to Seamus for a sloppy cut and witheringly precise with Dean about the color of his draft, and the ordinary weather of dread settled over the room. all of it exactly as it had always been, except for one thing which Harry felt before he understood it, and which he could see the others slowly begin to feel too. Snape did not come to him. In 5 years Snape had circled Harry's bench like weather circles a hill, drawn to it, unable to leave it alone, finding fault where there was fault and inventing it where there was none, the daily ritual of their war. And today he passed Harry's cauldron without a word. He looked at the brew. Harry saw him look, the eyes flicking down and the assessment happening behind them, and the brew was passable, not good. Harry was no potions prodigy and never would be, and on any other day in the last 5 years that passable would have been an invitation, a thing to be sneered at and docked points for. Snape said nothing. He moved on. He did not so much as say the name Potter, which he had been weaponizing against Harry since the child was 11. Ron noticed. Ron leaned over under the cover of stirring and breathed. "What's he playing at? You've not even been hexed once." "Dunno," Harry lied and stirred his own brew, and felt the new strangeness of being not tormented settle on him heavier than the torment ever had, because the torment had at least been a thing he understood. This was a man visibly, effortfully, declining to be cruel to him, and not knowing how to be anything else, and so being nothing, a careful and deliberate nothing, and the whole class felt the wrongness of it without being able to name the cause. Hermione, who could name the cause, kept her eyes on her cauldron and said not one word, and her silence was its own loud thing beside him. When the bell went and the room emptied, Harry was last to the door, and Snape spoke to his retreating back, low, not unkind, the only words he addressed to Harry the entire lesson. "Your dittany was added too early. The brew will keep a week, no more. Correct it next time." It was instruction, plain instruction, the kind a teacher gives a student he intends to keep teaching, and there was nothing in it of the old contempt, and Harry stood in the doorway a second with his ruined right hand in his pocket and his ruined certainties everywhere else, and said, "Yes, sir," and meant something by it that he could not have explained, and went. He summoned Harry the next evening by the ordinary means, a curt note in a fourth year's hand delivered to the Gryffindor table. "Potter, my office, 8 o'clock. The whole of the table groaned in sympathy, Snape having a detention waiting being the natural order of the universe, and Harry pocketed the note and said nothing and felt the compass needle drag north again hard. He went down to the dungeons at 8. The office was as he remembered it from a dozen detentions, the jars of pickled things gleaming on the shelves, the cold, the smell of smoke, but the figure behind the desk was different, or Harry's seeing of him was different, which amounted to the same thing. Snape did not make him stand. He gestured once at the chair across the desk, and Harry sat, and the two of them regarded each other across the scarred wood with the wariness of two people who have discovered they are tied together, and do not yet know whether the rope will save them or hang them. "I went to Gringotts," Snape said without preamble. "I had the inheritance rite performed, the goblin rite, which cannot be falsified and cannot be sealed away, and which the courts and the bank both hold as truth." He laid a heavy folded parchment on the desk between them, the goblin deed, its wax seal dark and official. "You may read it if you wish. I will summarize it to spare you the legal cant. The blood agrees. I am your father. There is no mistake, Potter, no corruption of the charm, no convenient error. I have spent 2 days hoping for the error as fervently as I have ever hoped for anything. There is none." Harry looked at the deed and did not pick it up. He had known, he realized. Somewhere since the hospital wing he had stopped genuinely believing it was a mistake and started only wishing it. The wishing had been a way of not deciding. Snape had gone and made it impossible to keep wishing, had spent his own money and his own hope to put the truth past doubt, and Harry understood, dimly, that this had been a kind of honesty most people would not have bothered with. It would have been easier for Snape to let it stay a maybe. He had refused the maybe. That meant something, though Harry could not yet say what. "So James wasn't my dad," Harry said. His voice came out rough. "He raised me for 15 months, and then he died with his wand in the wrong room so my mum could run, and I wasn't even his." "He knew," Snape said. Harry's head came up. "I do not have proof of it," Snape went on, and there was a care in how he said it, a deliberateness, a man laying out a thing he had thought hard about how to give. "But I knew them both once, and I have spent 2 days reasoning it through, and I am as certain as I can be without a memory to show you. Lily married James Potter in the autumn. You were born the following summer. The arithmetic is not subtle. James Potter was an arrogant, reckless, cruel when it suited him boy who grew, I will grant him this once and never again, into a man who loved your mother past sense. He would have known the dates as well as I can count them now. And he married her anyway and gave you his name and raised you as his own and died for you without hesitation." Snape's jaw worked once. "I despised James Potter for 20 years. It is a strange thing, Potter, to discover at 36 that the rival you despised did the single most decent thing in this entire wretched business. He took a child that was not his by blood and made him his own, by every other measure, and asked nothing, and told no one, and let me go on hating him for it. I cannot decide whether that makes it better or worse. I suspect it makes it both. Harry found that his eyes had gone hot and blurred, and he was furious at them for it here in front of this man, and he looked hard at the jars on the shelf until they steadied. James had known. James had looked at a baby that was Snape's and had chosen him anyway. It did not take James away. It gave him back somehow larger than before, a man who had not been tricked into fatherhood but had walked into it open-eyed for love. That was a thing Harry could hold. That was in fact the only thing in the last 2 days he had been able to hold without it cutting him. "Did he know about you?" Harry asked before he had decided to. "James, did he know you and my mum had that you'd before?" "I do not know," Severus said, and for once the not knowing seemed to cost him something. "We did not speak, your James and I, not civilly, not once, from the day we met to the day he died. Whatever he knew of me, he learned from her, and she would have told him only what she chose. I have wondered, I will wonder until I die, whether he looked at me across a battlefield knowing I had once been what he became, or whether he simply hated me as a schoolboy hates a rival and never knew there was more to hate me for." A pause. "It does not matter now. He raised you well by every account I have been forced to hear over the years. That is the only verdict on James Potter that signifies, and it is, I find, to my considerable annoyance, a verdict in his favor." "You loved her," Harry said. It was not a question. He had heard it in Lily Evans did nothing by accident in the last living piece of Lily, in the way his whole face changed shape around her name. "Yes," Snape said. The word came out of him stripped of everything, no defense around it, the barest he had ever sounded. "Since I was 9 years old, before either of us knew there was a magic in the world to share. I loved her and I lost her by my own stupidity and my own cruelty, the details of which are no business of yours and which I will carry to my grave, and I have spent 15 years believing that everything I did, every dangerous and thankless thing I did for the memory of her, because the memory was all that was left." He looked at Harry, and for once he did not look away, and the black eyes were not cold, they were only very tired and very old. "And it transpires that it was not all that was left. It transpires that the thing she left was sitting in the 3rd row of my classroom, hating me for excellent reasons, and that I treated him abominably, and that someone arranged matters so that I would never know to do otherwise. I am not asking you to forgive that, Potter. I am not certain it can be forgiven, and I have never had much use for forgiveness in either direction. I am telling you only that I did not know. If I had known," he stopped, started again lower. "If I had known, things would have been different. That is the most I can honestly promise you. Not better, necessarily. I am not a warm man, and I will not insult you by pretending I could have been. But different, you would not have been alone in it." The fire in the grate settled. Somewhere down a corridor a portrait snored. Harry sat in the cold office with the goblin deed between them and the father he had been handed across the desk, and felt the thing he had been holding so carefully since the hospital wing shift, not break, just shift, the way a great weight shifts when you finally get your shoulder properly under it. "Somebody hid it," Harry said, "on purpose, from you and from me. Hermione thinks it took a Wisengamot warrant. The goblins told you a wizard came and sealed the records, didn't they? Someone with enough pull that a bank didn't say number, they did." Snape's voice had gone careful again, the voice of a man checking a corridor before he spoke. "Potter, what I am about to say I say once, and you will not repeat it, not to your friends, not in any room with a portrait in it, not until I tell you the ground is safe, which it is not at present anywhere in this castle. Do you understand?" "Yes." "There is precisely one wizard in Britain with the standing to command that seal from the goblins, the access to reach a year-old Potter in the chaos after the war, and the particular long patience required to lay a charm meant to outlast every soul who might contest it." Snape held his gaze. "You have placed your trust in him your whole life. The wizarding world has built a religion on his judgment. And I served him for 14 years believing he had given me the only purpose I had left, when the truth is that he took my son and gave him to a cupboard in Surrey, and gave me the grief that made me useful, and called the whole arrangement protection." Harry did not say the name. Neither of them said it, but it stood in the cold office between them, vast and white-bearded and twinkling, and for the first time in either of their lives, the two of them, the wary boy and the wounded man, were looking at the same enemy from the same side of the line. "He's away," Harry said. "He is away. He will return." "And when he does," Snape said, and something moved in his face that Harry would later understand had been the beginning of an alliance, "we are going to ask him, you and I, why he decided that a lie was a kinder thing to give two people than the truth. And we are going to make certain this time that he answers." Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, The Headmaster's Reason. Dumbledore returned to Hogwarts on a Thursday after 11 days away, and the castle felt it the way a house feels the master come home, a settling in the walls, a steadying of the portraits, the staircases moving with a touch more confidence. By dinner the news had run the length of the school. By the time the plates cleared, Severus had sent his note up the spiral stair, 3 words in his cramped hand, and had received 3 words back in the looping violet ink that had governed his life for 14 years. Tonight, after 11. He did not go alone. That had been the argument conducted in the cold of his office 2 evenings running, and Harry had won it, not by being right, though he had been right, but by being immovable in a way Severus recognized from the inside, the stubbornness of a person who has been managed his whole life and has decided all at once to stop being managed. "It's about me," Harry had said. "It's my blood. It's my whole life," he rearranged. "You don't get to go up there and have it out with him and then come back and give me the edited version. I've had enough edited versions to last me forever." And Severus, who had been about to deliver some cutting remark about children and their place, had looked at his son across the desk and understood that Harry was, in fact, the only other person in the world with as much standing in the matter as himself, and that to manage him now, to decide what was good for him to know, would be to do the precise thing they were both about to accuse the headmaster of doing. So he had said very well and had been faintly astonished at himself, and they had gone up together, the wary boy and the wounded man, side by side on the moving stair, neither of them speaking because there was nothing left to say until the door opened. 2 nights earlier it had gone like this. Harry had come down to the dungeon office after curfew under the cloak because they had agreed without quite saying so that the fewer eyes the better, and Severus had unwarded the door without comment and set a second chair by the fire, which was its own unprecedented thing, Severus Snape inviting a Potter to sit. On the desk between them Harry had spread a sheet of Hermione's cramped, fierce handwriting, 3 pages of it, the citations underlined twice. "She doesn't know it's you," Harry had said, defensive before Severus could object. "I told her there was a glamour and that someone with a warrant put it on. I didn't tell her the rest. She thinks I'm being cautious because of the scar. She found all this in an afternoon. She's better at this than the whole ministry." That, Severus had said reading, is a depressingly low bar and she has cleared it by a mile. He had not meant it as praise and Harry had taken it as praise anyway, which Severus was beginning to learn was simply how Harry received anything that was not an outright insult. The notes were good. They were better than good. Actually, the topmost page began in the margin, the word boxed and starred. The Statute of Lineage, 1804, amended 1922, makes a 3rd-tier paternity charm on a minor without blood guardian consent a Class B offense. And the only lawful exception is a warrant from the full Wisengamot, not the chief warlock acting alone, which means either there's a warrant on record somewhere with signatures, or it was never lawful at all and whoever did it is exposed. And below, underlined, the blood protection at Privet Drive is keyed to the maternal sacrifice. It cannot depend on paternity. Whoever told Harry he had to stay there for his safety was telling him a half-truth at best. "She is correct on both points," Severus had said and laid the page down and looked at the fire a while, "which leaves us a choice. We can pursue the warrant, drag it into the light, before the Wisengamot, in a year when the Wisengamot is stuffed with men who answer to Lucius Malfoy and a minister who would sell his own grandmother for a quiet press. Or we can confront him privately and learn what we can and keep our powder dry. He'll lie," Harry had said. "He will not lie." Severus had said it with the weary certainty of long experience. That is what makes him dangerous, Potter. A liar can be caught in the lie. He tells the truth and selects which truths and arranges them so that you walk out believing you have the whole and possessing only the part he chose. I have watched it done to better men than us. The only defense is to know, going in, exactly what we want from him, and to refuse to leave until we have it, and to assume, always, that there is a door behind the door he shows us. Harry had been quiet, turning Hermione's pages, and then he had said, not looking up, "Why are you telling me the strategy? You could just go up there yourself. You've done this with him for 14 years. I'd only get in the way." And Severus had considered several cold answers and discarded them all, and given the true one, which was a thing he did so rarely that the words came out stiff with disuse. "Because he managed me for 14 years by deciding what I needed to know," he had said, "and I find I have no appetite for doing the same to you. If we are to be," he had stopped, the word family nowhere near sayable, "if we are to be anything other than 2 people, a clever old man arranged like furniture, then you will not hear the edited version from me. You will hear all of it, and you will make your own judgments, and you will be wrong sometimes, as I am wrong, and it will be your wrongness and not a thing chosen for you. That is the only inheritance I have to give that is worth the giving." Harry had looked at him then, a long look, the firelight in the green eyes that were lilies, and had said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that, and they had gone back to the pages, and the silence between them had been, for the first time, not a battlefield but a thing they were both standing inside together. It had not been comfortable, but it had been shared, and shared, Harry was learning, was a thing he could carry. Now the door opened, and the office was as it always was, the soft whir of the silver instruments, the slumbering portraits, Fawkes a low ember of red and gold on his perch, and Dumbledore behind the great desk with his half-moon spectacles and his folded hands and his expression of mild, attentive welcome, as though they had come about a timetable. He had a way of being delighted to see you that made it very hard to remember you had come to do battle. Severus had watched that delight disarm hardened men. He had been disarmed by it himself more times than he cared to count. "Severus," Dumbledore said warmly, "and Harry, sit, both of you. I confess the note was somewhat opaque, even for you, Severus, and I have spent the better part of the evening wondering what could have brought the two of you up my stair together, of all the unlikely pairings the year might produce." His eyes moved between them, blue and bright and reading everything. "Lemon drop, no," Severus said. Harry did not sit. He stood beside the chair with his right hand in his pocket and looked at the wizard he had trusted his whole life, the headmaster who had left him on a doorstep in November, who had sent him back to that doorstep every summer despite everything, who had looked at him across this very desk a dozen times with exactly this kindness, and Harry felt the foundation of something he had not known he was standing on begin to give. "We know," Harry said. Dumbledore's hands stayed folded. His face did not change, but something happened behind the eyes, a small adjustment, the look of a chess player who has seen a piece move to a square he had hoped it would not reach, and Severus, who had spent 14 years learning to read him across a board, saw it and knew that there would be no denial. Dumbledore did not waste effort on denials he could not sustain. He spent his effort elsewhere, on the framing, on the slow turning of a hard fact until it caught the light at the angle he preferred. "Tell me what you know," Dumbledore said gently, "so that I do not tell you more than you have come prepared to hear." "I had the goblin rite performed." Severus laid the deed on the desk, the wax seal upward, where the old man could not pretend not to see it. "Harry is my son. The blood agrees. It is recorded in the inheritance rolls and has been since his first year of life, where it sat beneath a glamour, a third-tier paternity charm, and a seal placed upon the bank's records by a wizard with authority no goblin would refuse. I am not here to ask whether you did it, Albus. I know the signature of your magic the way I know my own hand. I am here to ask why." His voice did not rise. It went very quiet and very precise, the voice he used on the rare occasions a thing had passed entirely beyond his rage and out the other side into something colder. "I am here to ask why you let me believe, for 14 years, that I had nothing left of her but the color of his eyes." The silver instrument's word, Fawkes shifted on his perch. Dumbledore was silent a long moment, and when he spoke at last he did not reach for delight, which told Severus more than the words would. The old man had decided this was a moment that called for gravity, and Dumbledore deployed his gravity as deliberately as his charm. "Sit, Harry," he said again, not unkindly, "please. What I have to tell you, you will want to be sitting for, and I find I cannot tell it well to a boy who is braced to flee." And Harry, after a moment, because his legs had begun to feel unreliable, sat. "I will not insult either of you by pretending it was simple," Dumbledore began, "nor by pretending I did it wholly for your sakes, though your sakes were in it. I have lived a long time, and I have learned that the kindest seeming reasons and the most calculating ones tend to grow in the same soil, and that a man who tells you he acted only out of love is either a saint or a liar, and I have never been a saint." He folded his hands again. "Let me begin with what is true and hardest. Lily asked me to keep the secret." Harry went still. Severus did not move at all. "When Lily came to me in the spring before you were born, Harry, she was already married to James, and she was carrying a child she knew was not his by blood, and she was more frightened than I had ever seen her, and Lily Evans was not a woman who frightened easily." Dumbledore's voice had gentled into something that might almost have been grief, and Severus, listening for the steel beneath it, could not be certain whether the grief was performed or real, which was the trouble with him. The performance and the feeling were woven too fine to separate. She was frightened for the child. You must understand the world as it was. Voldemort was ascendant. The Death Eaters were hunting, and they hunted not only their enemies but the families of their enemies, and Severus, the blue eyes moved to him, and there was no apology in them, only fact. Severus was at that time one of them, a marked Death Eater, a man who had given himself, however he later regretted it, to Voldemort's service. Lily knew this. And Lily reasoned correctly that a child known to be the son of Severus Snape would be a piece on the board the moment Voldemort thought to use it. A hostage, a lever against a servant whose loyalty was already suspect. Or if Severus's later turning became known, a target for revenge, the most precious thing he had, used to break him. That is conjecture, Severus said very low. You cannot know what she reasoned. I can, Dumbledore said, because she wrote it down and gave it to me and asked me to act on it if the worst came. And the worst came. He opened a drawer of the great desk slowly, the movements of an old man, and drew out a folded letter, the parchment soft with handling, the ink faded to brown, and he held it a moment as though weighing whether to give it up. And then he laid it on the desk beside the goblin deed, 2 documents of Harry's blood, the lie and the truth of it side by side. This is hers. I have kept it 15 years. I think perhaps it was always meant to come to the 2 of you in the end, though I confess I imagined a gentler arrival than this. Harry reached for it. His hand, the right one, came out of his pocket without his thinking, and the parchment cuff of his sleeve dragged back as he took the letter, and for half a second the back of his hand was visible in the lamplight, the pale scarred script standing on the skin, I must not tell lies, before he caught it and pulled the sleeve down. It was nothing. It was less than a second, but Severus saw it. Severus, who missed nothing, who had spent his life cataloguing the small tells of frightened people because his own life depended on reading them, saw the words on the back of his son's hand and went very still and said nothing, because there was a larger reckoning on the desk in front of them and he set the smaller one aside to burn over later. His face gave away none of it, but something in the room had changed for him. Quietly, a new account opened in a ledger that already ran long. Harry unfolded the letter. He read it once to himself, his lips moving slightly the way they had when he was small and reading was newer, and then, because Severus had not moved and would not ask, he read the part that mattered aloud, his voice unsteady, into the whirring quiet of the office. If you are reading this, Albus, then James and I are gone, and the thing I feared has come, and there is no one left to protect him but you and the choices we made. Keep the secret, I am begging you. Not from Save, he loved me in his way even after everything, and he would love him, I think, if he ever let himself, but love is exactly the lever they will use. If they know Harry is his son, they will never stop coming for him to own Severus or to punish him, and Severus has chosen a road that will not let him keep anything in the open. Let Harry be James's son. James gave him that gladly. James loved him from the first, knowing everything, and I will not have his gift undone. Let Harry grow up a Potter, ordinary and safe and loved, and let Severus keep his grief if grief is what keeps him alive. And when the war is over, if there is ever an after, then tell them the truth, both of them, and let them decide what they are to each other in a world that is no longer trying to kill them. But not before, promise me, not before it is safe, Lily. The letter ended. The office was silent except for the instruments. Harry sat with the parchment in his scarred hand and his mother's voice in the room. A woman dead 14 years speaking the one thing she had wanted for him, ordinary and safe and loved, none of which he had been given, and Severus stood beside him with his face like stone and his whole ruined history rearranging itself behind it. Because she had thought of him at the end, she had written he would love him, I think, if he ever let himself, and she had been right, and no one had let. It was Dumbledore who broke the silence, and he broke it gently, and he broke it with the steel showing at last, because he was a man who knew the value of letting a letter do its work before he laid his own claim on top of it. So I kept the secret, he said. As she asked, that much I did for her and for you, Harry, and I will not apologize for it, because I believe to this day that it kept you alive through a war that would otherwise have made you its favorite prize. He paused. But I told you I would not pretend it was simple. Here is the part that is not simple, and that you have come to hear, and that you deserve, both of you, to hear plainly. He looked at Severus. When the war ended, the first war, and Voldemort fell, and you came to me, Severus, broken, wanting to die, wanting a reason not to, I had a choice. I could have told you then. The danger was past for a time. Lily's letter said when it is safe, and there was a season those first years when it was as safe as it would ever be. I could have told you that you had a son and given him to you to raise. And you did not, Severus said, and I did not. Dumbledore did not flinch from it. That was the terrible thing about him, he never flinched. Because I needed you, Severus. I knew the war was not truly over. I knew he would return in some form in some year, and that when he did I would need a man inside his circle, a man Voldemort trusted, a man with a reason to hate that would read as loyalty. And I judged, here finally the gentleness thinned, and the cold engine of him showed through, the strategist who had moved nations. I judged that a man grieving a dead woman would walk back into that nest of vipers for me, would risk everything, would spend his life as a spy in the dark, because he had nothing left to lose and a memory to honor. and that a man with a living son would not. A father, Severus, will not gamble his life on a knife's edge for years on end when there is a child who needs him to come home. A father is a man with something to lose, and a man with something to lose is no use to me as a spy. So I weighed the war against your fatherhood, and I chose the war, and I left you your grief because your grief was the thing that made you brave. There, that is the truth you came for. I have never said it aloud to anyone, and I do not expect it to be forgiven, and I would, if I am honest, make the same choice again, because the war is larger than any one man's happiness, even a man I am fond of, even two. The silence after that was a different kind of silence. Harry was the one who moved first. He stood, the letter still in his hand, and he was shaking, and the named thing in him, the thing he had held down since the hospital wing through every careful evasion, came up at last and had a name, and the name was rage, clean and total, and almost a relief after so many days of having no shape for what he felt. You decided, Harry said, and his voice cracked, and he did not care. You decided he should keep being miserable because it made him brave. You decided I should grow up in a cupboard with people who hated me instead of with my own father, because a sad spy is more useful than a happy one. You did the math. You sat up here doing the maths on people's whole lives, on whether they got to have anyone, and you decided no, the war needs them broken, and you grieved about it. I bet you grieved while you did it. And then you sent me back to the Dursleys every single summer and watched me come back thin, and you knew, the whole time, you knew there was a man 2 floors down who... He stopped because his voice had gone entirely. He stood in the middle of the office with his mother's letter in his ruined hand and could not finish, and the silver instruments whirred on, indifferent as the goblins. Yes, Dumbledore said quietly, I did the maths, that is precisely what I did. It is what I have always done, Harry, and it is why this war has any chance of being won, and it is also, I am aware, why a great many people who trusted me have been broken on the wheel of my arithmetic. I take no pleasure in it. I have never taken pleasure in it, but pleasure was never the question. He removed his spectacles, polished them, a gesture Severus had seen 1,000 times, and now read for the stalling tactic it was. You are owed the truth. You are not, I am afraid, owed my regret, because I do not have the kind to offer you, and a false regret would insult you worse than honesty. I do not want your regret, Severus said. He had not spoken in some time. His voice, when it came, was so quiet that both of them turned to him, and it carried the cold of the gallery and the cold of the goblin chamber, and 14 years of a loyalty that had just discovered its own foundation was a lie someone had built on purpose. I want you to understand what you took, Severus said. Not the years. The years are gone. I am not a sentimentalist, and I will not stand here mourning a fatherhood that never was. I want you to understand that you made me your instrument by withholding the one fact that would have made me a man instead. You shaped me. You found a wound and you kept it open because an open wound bleeds usefully, and you called it the war, and perhaps it was the war, but do not, Albus, ever again tell me that you protected him. He gestured once at Harry, at the scarred hand, at all of it. You did not protect him. You protected your war, and he was the cost, and so was I, and you have the gall to be untroubled by it because your arithmetic came out in your favor. I have served monsters who were more honest about what they wanted from me. That, Dumbledore said, and for the first time something flickered that might have been pain, or might have been the performance of pain, is unkind, Severus, and not entirely fair. But I will not argue it because you are not wrong in the part that matters. He set his spectacles back on his nose. The question before us now is not the past. The past is fixed, even I cannot move it, and God knows I have tried. The question is what we do, the three of us, with a truth that is now loose in the world, in a year when Dolar's Umbridge sits in this castle, reporting my every breath to a minister who would like nothing better than a reason to take Harry from my protection and place him somewhere more convenient to the ministry's purposes. You think the danger is past because Voldemort does not yet know. The danger is not past. It has merely changed its face, and its new face wears a great deal of pink. And there it was, Severus thought, the turn, the place where the old man stopped defending the past and began smoothly to manage the future, to make himself necessary again, to fold their rage into a strategy that would, by morning, have them needing him once more. It was masterful. It was almost beautiful to watch, the way a trap is beautiful when you can see all its mechanism and still feel its teeth. And the worst of it was that he was not wrong. He was never wrong about the danger. That was how he held them. He lied about everything except the threat, and the threat was always real, and so you forgave the lies because the alternative was facing the threat alone. Harry was looking at the letter again, and Severus watched him do it, watched his son's anger bank itself down into something colder and more durable, and recognized the process because it was his own. His son was learning in real time in this office the lesson that had made Severus what he was, that the people who say they love you and the people who use you are very often the same people, and that you survive by keeping both facts in your hand at once. "I want to keep her letter," Harry said. Not a request, he had folded it small and his fist was closed around it. "It is yours," Dumbledore said. "It always was, and I'm not going back to the Dursleys." Harry's voice was steady now, the rage gone underground where it would do its real work. "Not this summer, not ever. The protection's maternal, isn't it? It runs through my mum and my aunt because they're sisters. It doesn't care who my father is, so it'd hold wherever I am as long as I'm somewhere a relative of my mother's." And his eyes went to Severus and away, too fast to read, "and it never had anything to do with keeping me there. You kept me there because it kept me small. Because a boy who's loved gets ideas, and a boy in a cupboard does what he's told. Hermione worked out the protection holds either way, so don't tell me it was for my safety. We're past that." Dumbledore looked at him a long moment, and there was something in the look that Severus could not quite name, surprise, perhaps, or the particular regret of a craftsman whose creation has turned in his hand and shown him an edge he did not intend to forge. "You have grown up a great deal," Dumbledore said, "in 11 days. "I've had help," Harry said, and did not look at Severus when he said it, which was, Severus understood, its own kind of acknowledgement, the first his son had offered, sideways and grudging and real. "There's a prophecy," Harry said then into the warm office, and it was not a question, and the silver instrument seemed to hush around it. About me and Voldemort. That's why he came for us. That's why you placed me where you placed me, why all of it. You've never told me what it said. You've let me find out drop by drop, the hard way every year, and you still won't say it." He met the blue eyes and did not look away, and Severus saw in the steadiness of it his son's mother, who had also been incapable of flinching from a thing once she had decided to look at it. "You owe me that too, as much as you owed me her letter." For a moment something crossed Dumbledore's face, and it was, Severus thought, the nearest the old man had come all evening to being genuinely caught, because this was the door behind the door behind the door, the one he guarded most jealously of all. "You are not ready," Dumbledore said gently, and the gentleness was iron. "I will tell you. I give you my word, which I am aware has lost some of its currency in this room tonight, that I will tell you the whole of the prophecy before the year is out. But not tonight. Tonight you have learned that your father lives and that I am not the wizard you believed, and that is enough weight for one evening. A mind can carry only so much overturning at once before it stops being able to carry anything. The prophecy will keep a little longer. It has kept 15 years. He folded his hands. "Do not mistake me, Harry. I am no longer in a position to withhold things from you by force. You have a father now and an ally in Miss Granger, and you will dig the truth out with or without my leave, as you have always done. I am asking you for time, not silence. There is a difference, and I have spent tonight learning, painfully, that you have grown old enough to know it." Harry held his gaze a moment longer, and then nodded once, accepting the delay without trusting it, which was, Severus reflected, exactly the correct posture toward anything Albus Dumbledore promised, and a thing it had taken Severus himself 2 decades to learn. They left soon after. There was more said, the cold practical things, the arrangements, the agreement that nothing would be made public, that Umbridge above all must learn nothing, that the question of where Harry would go, and what Severus would be permitted to be to him, would wait until the immediate danger of the Ministry's interest had passed. Dumbledore conceded the points one by one, gracefully, the way a man concedes the small squares to keep the center of the board, and Severus let him, because the small squares were what mattered tonight and the center could be fought for later. But at the door, with his hand on the cold iron of the handle and Harry already on the moving stair, Severus turned back. "There is more," he said. "It was not a question. You have told us the why of the secret and the why of your silence after, and both ring true, which is how I know they are not the whole of it. You always tell the truth, Albus. You simply never tell all of it, and you arrange the part you tell so that no one thinks to ask for the rest. So I will ask. Is there a reason beyond the war, beyond Lily's letter, that you bound my son's blood beneath a glamour, and not merely his name beneath a seal? A seal hides a fact. A third-tier charm changes a man. Why did you need to change him, and not only hide him?" For the space of 3 heartbeats, Dumbledore said nothing, and in that nothing Severus read the confirmation he had come for, that there was indeed more, and that the old man had hoped not to be asked, and that whatever it was the part he guarded most closely of all. "Good night, Severus," Dumbledore said gently, and the gentleness was a door closing. "Look to your son's right hand. I think you will find it a more urgent matter than my reasons, and rather more within your power to mend." And the door, which had been Severus's to open, was somehow the headmaster's to close, and Severus stood on the moving stair as it carried him down into the dark beside his silent, furious, scarred son, and understood that they had won everything they came for and learned nothing they most needed to know, and that this, precisely this, was what it had always felt like to leave that office, and that he had simply never before had cause to notice. He did not let Harry go up to the tower. At the foot of the spiral stair, where the gargoyle closed behind them and the corridor stretched cold and empty in both directions, Severus said, "My office." Now in the old flat voice, the classroom voice, and Harry, who had been braced for an argument the whole way down and found he had no fight left in him tonight, followed without protest. The dungeon was banked low and warm against the October cold. Severus warded the door, lit the lamp, and turned and held out his hand, palm up, the gesture of a man who will not be refused. "Your right hand," he said, "give it to me." "It's nothing," Harry said. "I saw it in his office." "Do not insult us both by calling it nothing. Your hand, Potter." For a moment Harry did not move, the old instinct, the one drilled into him under a staircase in Surrey, that you did not show an adult your hurts, because adults who saw your hurts either ignored them or made them worse. Then because he was tired, because of the scene by the fire 2 nights before, because some part of him had been carrying this alone for 2 weeks and was nearly out of the strength it took, he put his right hand into Severus's. Severus turned it to the lamplight and went very still. "I must not tell lies." The words stood on the back of the hand in pale raised script, scarred deep, the kind of scar that does not fade because it has been reopened along the same lines too many times to heal clean. He had seen wounds in his life. He had made some. But there was a particular quality to a wound that is meant not only to hurt but to mark, to write a thing into a child's flesh where the child must read it every day. And Severus knew that quality intimately, from the inside, from a childhood in a house in Spinner's End, where the marks had been the other kind, but the principle had been the same. He held his son's ruined hand under the lamp, and the cold thing that lived in him where other people kept their tempers went perfectly quiet, which was how he knew it had passed beyond temper. "Who?" he said, just the one word. "It doesn't matter. It is a blood quill." Severus's voice had gone soft, and the softness was the most frightening thing Harry had ever heard from him, softer than any shout. "A black quill. They are Class A restricted. Possession alone is a sentence in Azkaban. There is precisely one person in this castle with the arrogance and the protection to use one on a student and expect no consequence, and she wears pink and takes her tea with 3 sugars and reports to the minister. You will tell me I am right." Harry said nothing, which was the answer. Severus set the hand down, gently, the gentleness deliberate, a thing he was choosing in front of Harry so the choice would be seen. He went to a cabinet and took down a squat jar of something silver and pungent and a clean cloth, and he came back and sat, not behind the desk, but in the chair beside Harry, close, and took the hand again and began to work the salve into the scarred letters with a care that did not match anything Harry had ever known of him. "Murtlap essence," Severus said as he worked, because the explaining was easier than the silence for both of them. "It will not erase the scar is set, and a deep one. But it will draw the inflammation and ease the ache, and you will apply it nightly, and you will come to me when the jar is empty, and I will give you another, and you will not," his hand stilled a moment, "you will not go back to that office and let her open these again without telling me. Do you understand? You will sit her detentions because to refuse them is to give her exactly the defiance she is fishing for, but you will come to me after every time, and I will tend it every time, and we will keep a record, dates and depths, in my hand, witnessed, against the day it can be used. Is that understood, Potter?" "Why?" Harry said. His voice had gone strange. "Why do you care? 2 weeks ago you'd have given me the detention yourself." Severus did not stop working the salve in. He looked at the hand, not at Harry, because some things could only be said to a hand. "Because 2 weeks ago I did not know," he said. "And because a man," he corrected himself, the word coming hard, "because a father who has just been told he has a son does not get to choose what kind of son, or what kind of damage the son arrives carrying, or how much of that damage he himself caused in his ignorance. He gets only to decide what he does from the moment he knows, and I have decided." He pressed the cloth flat over the salve and held it there, warm, the pressure steady. "I have done you a great deal of harm, Potter, with my own hand these 5 years, believing I had cause. I will not now stand by while a woman in pink does the same and calls it discipline. Whatever else is true, whatever we are or are not to each other, that at least I will not permit, not to my son, not while I am in this castle and have wands and a working knowledge of poisons." A dry, terrible flicker at the corner of his mouth. "It is a low bar to clear, I am aware. The not permitting a child to be tortured bar. But you will find, Potter, that a great many people who claim to love you have failed to clear it, and I, who never claimed to love anyone, am clearing it tonight, and intend to go on clearing it, and you may make of that whatever your suspicious nature allows." Harry sat very still under the warm cloth and the steady pressure of a hand that 2 weeks ago had only ever been raised against him, and found that his eyes had gone hot and blurred again, and this time he did not look at the jars on the shelf to make them stop. He let them blur. The dungeon was warm, and the salve had numbed the burning to a distant ache, and for the length of a few breaths, in the last place on earth he would have chosen, Harry Potter was a boy having his wound tended by his father, and neither of them said one word about it, because to name it would have broken it, and they both, in their different schools of survival, had learned exactly that. "Apply it nightly," Severus said again, and put the jar in Harry's good hand, and stood, the moment closed, the armor back, but something altered behind it that would not go back to how it had been. "Now go to bed. It is nearly 2, and you have transfiguration at 9, and Minerva will know you have not slept, and she misses nothing, which is a quality I would advise you to start respecting in the adults around you. Go." Harry went. At the door he stopped, the jar warm in his hand, and said without turning, because some things could only be said to a door, "Thanks, Dad." And then he was gone up the dark corridor before either of them could discover what to do with the word, and Severus stood alone in the warm dungeon with the empty cloth in his hands and the word hanging in the air where Harry had left it, and did not move for a very long time. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, Occlumency. The lessons began again the following week, and on the timetable that Umbridge inspected they were called remedial potions, which fooled no one and was meant to fool no one, because the point of Umbridge was not that she believed the lies told to her, but that she enjoyed watching people tell them. Twice a week after dinner, Harry went down to the dungeon, and the school assumed Snape had found some fresh way to make a Potter suffer, and the school was, for once, entirely wrong. "Occlumency," Severus said on the first evening, "is the art of sealing the mind against external penetration. You will have heard me use the word before last year when I attempted to teach it to you, and you treated the attempt with the seriousness you reserve for everything I say, which is to say none." He stood across the office from Harry with his wand held loose at his side and the lamplight carving the lines of his face deeper. "We are going to try again. And this time, Potter, you are going to apply yourself because the stakes have changed, and you are old enough now to be told what they are." "You never told me what they were last year," Harry said. "You just kept breaking into my head and getting angry when it hurt." It landed. Severus did not pretend it had not. "No," he said after a moment, "I did not tell you. I told myself you did not need to know the whole of it, that the knowing would frighten you into worse failure, and I have recently developed a strong distaste for men who decide what you do not need to know, so I will tell you the whole of it." He set his wand on the desk, a disarming gesture, deliberate. "The Dark Lord and you are connected, through your scar, in a manner neither I nor anyone living entirely understands. The connection runs both ways. You have seen through his eyes, you saw the snake attack Arthur Weasley, which is the only reason he survived. But a door that opens one way opens the other. He can, when his guard slips or his attention turns to you, see through yours. He can read what is uppermost in your mind, and there is now in your mind a thing that must never, under any circumstances, become uppermost where he might find it." Harry went still. He had not thought of it that way. He had been so occupied with the enormity of the truth itself that he had not followed it down the corridor to its most dangerous room. "If he learns," Harry said slowly, "that you're my father." "Then I am dead," Severus said without drama, the way a man states a fact he has made his peace with long ago. "Not quickly. He does not waste a useful death. He would learn it, and he would say nothing, and he would keep me at his side and use it, the way Albus once feared he would, a son to dangle a lever, a way to be certain of a servant whose loyalty he has never fully trusted. Or he would learn it and decide I am compromised past use and make an example. Either way my usefulness to the order ends, and with it whatever protection my position affords a great many people, including you. And he would have you marked twice over, the prophecy boy and the son of his own traitor. He would never stop." Severus picked the wand back up. "So you understand that this is no longer a punishment, and no longer a chore, and no longer a thing you may fail at because you find me unpleasant. This is the wall between a secret and a man's life, mine, and I would suggest yours. Now clear your mind, empty it, and when I enter, push me out." It was hard. It was harder than anything in any classroom, because the thing occlumency demanded was the precise opposite of everything Harry had built himself out of. It asked him to stop feeling, to go smooth and empty and cold, and Harry was a creature made of feeling held down by force, and the holding down took everything he had and left nothing over for the wall. Severus went into his mind that first night a dozen times, and a dozen times Harry stood in the wreckage afterward, breathing hard, furious, while the memories the intrusion had dredged up settled slowly back into the dark, the cupboard under the stairs, Cedric falling, the graveyard, the blood quill, the things he kept locked and Severus kept finding. On the 9th attempt, the intrusion went somewhere Harry had not built a door over, because he had never imagined anyone would want to look there, and Severus came down into a memory so small and so old that Harry had nearly forgotten he owned it. A cupboard. The underside of a staircase, the slope of it close overhead, a thin mattress, a single bare bulb on a string, and a spider in the corner that the child inside the memory had named, because the spider was the only company the cupboard offered. A voice on the other side of the door, his aunt's, telling him there would be no supper, that he was lucky to be fed at all, that he was a burden they had never asked for. The child in the cupboard was perhaps 6, he was not crying. That was the part that came through clearest, riding the memory like a smell. The child had learned already, at 6, that crying made it worse, and so he lay very still in the dark and counted the slats of the stair above him and waited for the house to sleep. And this was so ordinary to him, so completely the texture of his days, that the memory carried no drama at all, only the flat gray patience of a child who has decided that this is simply what the world is. Severus withdrew so abruptly that Harry staggered. For a moment neither of them spoke. Severus had gone the color of old parchment, and his wand hand had dropped to his side, and he was looking at Harry, who had become, between one second and the next, a different person in his eyes, some long-held belief knocked out from under him without warning. Harry braced for the sneer, the comment about Potters and their need for sympathy. It did not come. "How long?" Severus said. His voice had gone very quiet. "The cupboard, how long did you live in it?" "Until I was 11. Harry shrugged, the old defensive shrug, the one that had learned to make small things of large ones, because making large things of them had never once helped. It's fine. I got Dudley's second bedroom when the Hogwarts letters started coming to the cupboard and freaked them out. It was just where I slept. It wasn't a big deal." "It was a big deal," Severus said. Each word came out separately, set down with care, like a man who did not trust himself to run them together. "He sent you there, knowing, every summer. I watched him sign the order every August in that office, and I thought, Potter goes back to his family, lucky boy, loved boy, the famous Harry Potter and his doting relations, and I resented you for it, Potter, I resented you for having what I never." He stopped. His jaw worked once. He turned away to the cold hearth and stood there with his back to Harry and his shoulders not quite still, and when he spoke again it was to the fire. "I grew up in a house like that, not the same. The cupboard was your particular cruelty. Mine wore a different shape and smelled of drink, but I know the inside of that flat gray patience you just showed me. I know it from the inside, Potter, and I would not have wished it on any child, and I wished 100 unkind things on you, and never once, not once, did I imagine I was wishing them on a boy who already knew the dark under a staircase better than he knew his own face. I am," and the word came out of him like a tooth pulled, "I am sorry. For that, at least, of all the things I have no right to be forgiven, I find I am sorry." It was the first time Severus Snape had apologized to him for anything, and Harry stood in the dungeon and did not know what to do with it, so he did nothing, which was, it turned out, the right thing, because the apology had not been a transaction requiring a reply. It had simply been true and set down between them and left there. "You couldn't have known," Harry said at last. "Nobody knew, that was the whole point of it." "No," Severus agreed to the fire, "nobody knew. That appears to be the recurring difficulty of your life, Potter, and mine, and the wizard who arranged both. Nobody was permitted to know anything." He breathed out and turned, and the armor was back, but it sat differently now, the way a coat sits differently once you have seen the body underneath it. "Enough, stand up. We will try again, and this time you will put a door over the cupboard as well, because it is precisely the kind of memory he will reach for, the undefended ones, the ones that tell him what you love and what you fear. Build the wall, Potter, we are not finished." But it was different from last year, and the difference was that Severus, when he withdrew, did not sneer. "You are trying to build the wall out of anger," Severus said after the 6th attempt, not unkindly. "I know the impulse. Anger is the nearest thing to hand, and it feels like strength. It is not strength. It is a door with a great deal of noise behind it, and noise draws him. You must build the wall out of the opposite, out of stillness. Find one thing, Potter, one memory that is quiet and entirely yours and that does not hurt, and go and stand inside it when I come and hold the door from there." He paused. "What do you have that is quiet?" Harry thought. It took him an embarrassingly long time, which told its own story, and Severus waited, and did not fill the silence, which was itself a kind of patience Harry was not used to receiving. "The first time I flew," Harry said at last, "first year, before everything, I just got on the broom and it worked, and for about a minute it was the best thing that had ever happened to me and nobody wanted anything from me about it. It was just mine." Something crossed Severus's face, there and gone. Your mother flew like that, he said quietly. Not skilled, she was never skilled, she found the whole business undignified. But the once or twice I saw her in the air she had exactly that, the thing you are describing, the surprise of it, the gladness. Go and stand in that minute, Potter, and hold the door from inside it. He raised his wand, again. And Harry went and stood in the minute on the broom, the wind and the height and the wanting nothing of it. And when Severus came this time, Harry did not meet him with anger, but simply did not let him pass the door of that bright cold minute. And Severus pushed, and the door held, and Severus pushed harder, and the door held, and then Severus withdrew on his own and lowered his wand and said, "Yes," just the one word. And it was the first time in 5 years Harry had done a thing in front of this man and been told yes, and it sat in his chest warm and unfamiliar all the way back up to the tower. Hermione had taken the whole business as a research project, which was how Hermione took grief, hers and other people's, and Harry had let her, partly because it helped her and partly because she was, as ever, frighteningly effective. "Right," she said on the Sunday, in the corner of the library where Madam Pince could not hear them, and the towering shelves made a kind of room. She had 3 books open and a roll of parchment covered in her writing and the particular shine in her eye that meant she had found something. "I've been through the whole of heritable magic and the law and most of bloodlines and bindings, and Harry, I think there's a way to make you safe, properly safe, legally." "Go on," Harry said. "Blood adoption." She tapped the older of the 2 books. "It's ancient, it's mostly fallen out of use, but it's never been repealed, which is the important bit. It's a ritual, not a ministry form, which means it doesn't go through the Wisengamot and it can't be blocked by them. 2 wizards, the child and the parent." She went slightly pink, because she had worked out more than Harry had told her and was being delicate about it. "They share blood in a warded right, and it makes the relationship." She searched for the word true. Recognized by magic itself, not just by paperwork. The old families used it for heirs. "Here's the part that matters." Her finger moved down the page. "Once a blood adoption is sealed, it supersedes all prior glamours and concealments, because you can't adopt over a lie. The magic won't hold, so the rite forces the true bloodline to surface and then binds it openly. And then the boxed-and-starred word again. Once the relationship is magically recognized, the recognized parent has an absolute claim of guardianship that even the Wisengamot cannot easily override, because it predates their authority. It's older than the ministry. The ministry hates it for exactly that reason and has tried to legislate around it for 2 centuries and never quite managed, because the right is in the blood and they can't reach the blood. Harry looked at her. "You're saying if," he chose his words, conscious of the open library even in their warded corner, "if a certain person did this right with me, the ministry couldn't take me away from him, or send me back to the Dursleys, or anything." "I'm saying it would be the strongest possible protection short of you coming of age," Hermione said. "Stronger than Dumbledore's word, which, no offense, hasn't exactly been doing you favors. It would make it real in a way nobody could undo or hide again. And it would mean," her voice softened, "it would mean nobody could ever do to you again what they did when you were 1. Nobody could rewrite who your family is. You'd be the one who chose it, out in the open where it can't be glamoured over." It was, Harry thought, the whole thing laid out by a 16-year-old in a library, the chance to take the most stolen fact of his life and make it his own choosing instead of someone else's secret. He folded the parchment and put it inside his robes against his chest where his mother's letter already lived. "Thanks," he said, for not making it weird." "It is weird," Hermione said. "It's possibly the weirdest thing that's ever happened to any of us, and we once turned ourselves into cats, but weird isn't the same as wrong." She started gathering her books. "Ron wanted me to tell you, by the way, that he doesn't need to know the details, but that if you ever want to talk about it, or not talk about it, or heck something about it, he's, his words, around. He's been covering for you brilliantly, you know. Told Seamus you've got extra potions because Snape's failing you on purpose to keep you off the Quidditch team, and now half of Gryffindor wants to start a petition." She almost smiled. "You've got people, Harry, whatever else is a mess. You've got people." It stayed with Harry, that phrase, all the way back up to the tower and into the days after. "You've got people." He had spent so long believing the opposite, believing that he was fundamentally a person things were done to rather than a person who was held, that the simple fact of it kept catching him off guard in odd moments, like a step that is not where the foot expects it. Ron saving him a seat without being asked. Hermione sliding her notes across so he would not have to admit he had missed the lesson. A grim man in a dungeon asking after his throat. He had been so well trained by the cupboard to expect nothing that the receiving of ordinary kindness felt, even now, faintly like a trick he was waiting to have sprung. He was learning slowly that it was not a trick. That was the hardest lesson of the autumn, harder than occlumency, harder than the law, learning to let himself be cared for without flinching, without bracing for the withdrawal that, in his experience, always came. It had not come. Week after week, it had simply not come. And the not coming was rewriting something in him that 15 years of the Dursleys had written wrong. Severus gave him the book on a Thursday, before a lesson, without ceremony, which was the only way he could have given it. It was waiting on the desk when Harry came down, a slim battered volume in faded green cloth, a beginner's guide to transfiguration, the spine cracked white with handling, and Harry would have taken it for some remedial text Snape meant to humiliate him with until he opened the cover and saw the name written inside in a round, careful schoolgirl hand, the letters looping with the deliberateness of a child proud of her penmanship. Lily Evans, first year. Hands off, this means you, Severus. Harry's good hand went still on the page. She wrote in all her books, Severus said from across the office, not looking at Harry, busying himself with a cabinet that did not need attention. It drove the librarian to distraction. Marginalia, corrections, arguments with the authors. She thought a book you had not argued with was a book you had not properly read. I have, he paused, I have kept a number of them. They came to me after, in the way such things do, through hands that did not know what they had. I did not look at them for 14 years, I could not. And then I found recently that I wished someone to have them who would understand what they were, and there is precisely one such person now living, and he is standing in my office failing to clear his throat. Harry turned the pages. They were dense with her, the young Lily arguing in the margins with a transfiguration textbook, but why does the inanimate to animate threshold require conscious intent, surely a sufficiently complex charm, the question trailing off into a diagram she had drawn herself, careful and wrong and curious. A pressed flower fell from between two pages, flat and brown and ghostly, a daisy 15 years dead. Harry caught it before it reached the floor and held it in his palm, this dead little thing his mother had picked and pressed and forgotten, and the lump in his throat became something he could not talk around. There are others, Severus said, still to the cabinet. Charms, potions, naturally she was better at potions than I was, which I never admitted to her and will deny to my grave if you repeat it. A book of Muggle poems she loved that I never understood. You may have them. Not all at once, I find I can part with them only one at a time, which is a weakness I will thank you not to comment on, but they are yours. They were always going to be yours, I simply did not know it, and neither did the one who hid you from me, or perhaps he did, and counted on my never finding out, in which case these books are one more thing he stole in their small way by keeping us apart. He shut the cabinet finally and turned, and his face was composed and his eyes were not. She would have wanted you to have her arguing in the margins. She would have wanted you to argue back, so argue back, Potter, right in it. She would have hated to see it kept clean out of reverence. Reverence bored her. She wanted everything used. Harry closed the book around the pressed daisy carefully and held it against his chest with his mother's letter and the parchment of the right, the small archive of who he came from growing slowly heavier and more real against his ribs, and said, because he could not say the larger thing, I'll write in it. See that you do, Severus said, and that was the end of it, the gift given and received the only way two people like them could manage, sidelong, gruff, enormous, and they went on to the lesson, and neither mentioned the daisy or the round, careful hand or the 14 years a book had waited in the dark for a boy who had been waiting in his own dark 2 streets and a whole stolen childhood away. The memory came 2 weeks into the lessons, on an evening when Harry had held the door against 3 intrusions running and Severus had called a halt early, which he had never done, and stood a while at the cold hearth with his back to Harry, and then said, without turning, in a voice gone strange, there is something I am going to show you. I have debated it. I have decided you are owed it, and that I would rather you had it from me than from a parchment after I am dead, which, given my occupation, is not the distant prospect you might assume. He drew his wand to his temple and withdrew a long silver thread of memory, and laid it in the shallow stone basin Harry had not noticed on the side table, the pensive, its surface stirring with light, and he stood back. I will not come in with you, Severus said. Some things a man does not watch a second time in company. You will see what there is to see, and you will come out, and we will not discuss it, and that is the price of my showing you. Agreed. Agreed, Harry said, and bent and fell into the silver. He came down into a summer. A river slow and brown and edged with willows, the kind of ordinary English river that runs behind ordinary towns, and the light was the thick gold light of late afternoon in a year long before Harry was born, and on the bank in the long grass were 2 people. One was a boy of perhaps 17, thin and sallow, and dressed wrong for the weather in a too heavy coat, with black hair to his collar and an expression that did not know what to do with happiness and so wore it badly, like a borrowed coat that did not fit. It took Harry a moment to understand that this was Snape. The other was a girl, and Harry knew her before she turned, knew the dark red of her hair, and then she turned and laughed at something he had said, and her eyes were green, were Harry's eyes, were the eyes Harry saw every morning in the mirror and had been told his whole life belonged to a stranger. And she was alive. She was so completely and ordinarily alive, lying in the grass with her shoes off and a book open and forgotten on her chest. And Harry stood on the bank of a summer 15 years dead and looked at his mother for the first time as a person and not a grave. "Doesn't matter what Mulciber did," the young Snape was saying, with the wretched stubbornness of a boy defending the indefensible, and Lily was already shaking her head. But she was not angry, not yet. This was before the anger. This was a version of them where the anger had not yet won, and she said, "It matters to me, Save. It'll always matter to me. That's the thing you don't." And then she stopped and looked at him. And the exasperation went out of her face and left something fonder and sadder behind. "You really don't see it, do you? You can't even see why I'd mind. That's what frightens me." And she reached over and pushed a strand of his lank hair out of his eyes, an absent, tender gesture, the gesture of someone who has done it 100 times. And the young Snape went absolutely still under her hand, the way Harry had seen the older Snape go still in the hospital wing. And for one moment in the gold light the two of them were simply happy and doomed and 17, and Harry understood, watching, more than any letter or any goblin deed had told him, that whatever else this man was, he had once been loved by Lily Evans, and had loved her back with the whole of a self that did not know how to do anything by halves, and had lost her, and had carried the losing for 30 years like a stone swallowed whole. The memory thinned and Harry let it. He rose up out of the silver and stood in the dungeon, blinking, his face wet, and Severus stood by the hearth exactly where Harry had left him, his back still turned, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. "She pushed your hair out of your eyes," Harry said finally, because it was the smallest and safest of the enormous things in him. "Like it was nothing, like she did it all the time." "She did it all the time," Severus said to the fire. His voice was perfectly steady, and that was how Harry knew what it cost. "We grew up 2 streets apart. Before Hogwarts, before either of us knew what we were, she was the only person who—" He stopped. "She was the first person who was ever kind to me, the first who treated me as though I were worth being kind to. I have never quite recovered from it. I do not expect to." He turned at last, and his face was composed, the armor back, but his eyes were red-rimmed, and he did not bother to hide it, which was its own kind of trust. "You have her eyes. Everyone says it because it is true, and because it is all most of them dare say. But you have more than her eyes, Potter. You have the thing she had that I never did, the thing she was trying to make me see by that river, the part that minds what is done to other people, the part that could not look away from cruelty even when looking away would have cost it less. You did not get that from me, you got it from her. I have watched you get yourself nearly killed 3 years running for the sake of people who had no claim on you, and every time, somewhere under my contempt, I thought, there she is again." He breathed out. "I should have known, a blind man should have known. I looked at her eyes for 5 years and called them an insult when they were the only mercy I had left." Harry did not know what to say, so he said the true thing, which he was learning slowly from this least likely of teachers. "I'm glad you showed me," he said. "I've never seen her move before, just photographs. She was always frozen, and now I've seen her laugh." His own voice did something complicated. "Thanks for giving me that, even though it costs you." "Especially because it costs me," Severus said. "Cheap gifts are worth what they cost. Now go to bed." "And Potter," he said as Harry reached the door, "the memory stays between us, not your friends, not Miss Granger, however cleverly she asks. That summer is the most private thing I own, and I have just handed it to you, and I am trusting you with it, which is a thing I do approximately never. Do not make me regret it." "You won't," Harry said, and meant it, and for once Severus appeared to believe him, which was its own quiet landmark in a thawing neither of them would have called by name. The vision came on a night in late November, and it found Harry unguarded, because a person cannot hold the occlumency wall in his sleep, and that was the cruelty of the scar, that it waited for the hours when the wall could not be held. He woke in the dark with the old white pain splitting his forehead and the residue of it still draining out of him. A corridor he did not know, a door he could not open, the cold pleasure of a creature that was not him moving behind his own eyes, and he lay rigid in the dormitory with sweat cooling on him and his hands fisted in the sheets, and he did the new thing, the thing the autumn had taught him. Instead of lying alone with it until dawn as he had every other time, he got up and dressed and went down through the silent castle to the dungeons, because there was now somewhere to take it. Severus opened the door before Harry knocked, dressing-gowned and gray-faced and entirely awake, because he had felt his own mark stir faintly in sympathy with whatever had moved through the night, and he took one look at his son standing in the corridor with the scar livid and his eyes wrong and stood back to let him in without a word. He was pleased about something, Harry said, sitting where he was put, taking the goblet of something warm that was pressed into his hands. I couldn't see what, just pleased. Cold pleased, it woke me up. He drank, his hands steadied around the warmth. It's never woken me with him being happy before. It's always rage, or that's how I don't know which is worse. Drink that, and then we will see what is left of it that we can read. Severus sat across from him and did not lecture and did not demand and waited. You came down, that was correct. You should not have lain there alone with it. You have spent your life carrying these things alone because there was no one to carry them to, and there is now, and I would prefer you wore out my sleep than your own mind. Tell me what you saw, all of it in order, and we will turn it into intelligence instead of nightmare, which is the only revenge available to people like us against the things that get into our heads at night. And they sat together in the small hours, the two of them, turning the vision over, Severus drawing the details out with the patient precision he gave to a difficult brew. And somewhere in the doing of it, the horror of the thing became merely a problem, a set of facts to be examined, and the examining drained the terror out of it, the way the murtlap drained the fire from Harry's hand. By the time the goblet was empty, Harry was no longer shaking, and the corridor and the cold pleasure had become information to be passed quietly to the order rather than a private wound bleeding in the dark. And Harry understood that this, too, was a thing fathers did, that he had simply never had one to do it. Take the terrors a child brings them in the night, and by the act of sharing the weight, make them bearable. Severus would not have called it that. Severus called it intelligence gathering, and sent Harry back up to the tower near 3, with instructions to apply the occlumency the moment he woke if the dream returned. But Harry knew what it had been, even if neither of them would say it, and he slept after, better than he had in months. Umbridge came for them on a Wednesday. She had been circling for a week. Severus had felt it, the way a man who has lived among predators feels the attention of one before he sees it. The twice-weekly visits of Harry Potter to the dungeons had not escaped her ledger. She had asked Severus sweetly in the staff room whether the remedial sessions were truly necessary, whether Mr. Potter's marks justified so much of a senior professor's time, whether there might not be something, she had let the word hang, irregular in the arrangement. And Severus had given her the bored contempt that was his native tongue, and told her Potter was a hopeless dunderhead whose continued presence in his NEWT stream the headmaster insisted upon, and that he resented every minute of it, and would she care to take the remedial work off his hands. She had declined, smiling, unconvinced, and Severus had known the matter was not closed. On the Wednesday she did not ask. She came down to the dungeons herself during a lesson and pushed open the door without knocking, clipboard in hand, 2 large silent seventh years from her inquisitorial squad at her back, and found Harry Potter sitting across the desk from Severus Snape with a stone basin between them and an expression of caught guilt that no story would quite cover. Professor Snape, Umbridge said in the voice of a woman who has been waiting weeks for a particular pleasure. And Mr. Potter, how cozy. I do hope I am not interrupting your remedial work. Her eyes went to the pensive, to the silver light moving in it, and sharpened. What an unusual teaching aid. I don't believe I've approved its use. The ministry takes a great interest, you know, in unauthorized magical objects in proximity to students, particularly this student. There was a silence in which a great deal could have gone wrong. Harry felt the secret rise in him, the whole monstrous truth straining toward the surface where this woman's pink-gloved fingers could reach it. And he did the thing Severus had drilled into him, found the bright cold minute on the broom and went and stood inside it and held the door, and his face went smooth and bored and gave Umbridge nothing. And Severus, watching, registered it, Harry holding his occlumency under live fire for the first time. And felt a flicker of something that in a warmer man would have been pride. It is a pensive Madam Umbridge, Severus said, rising, unhurried, his voice gone silk over steel. A standard instrument for the review of theoretical sequences too complex for a glance at Harry, contemptuous, perfect, limited memory to retain in the ordinary way. Potter cannot hold a 4-step brewing order in his head from one week to the next. I show him the sequence performed correctly. It is remedial in the most literal sense. You are welcome to inspect the instrument, of course, though I would caution you. And here his voice dropped and acquired an edge that even Umbridge's complacency registered, that a pensive holds the private memories of its owner, and that I have in my time served this castle and its headmaster in capacities that touch upon matters the ministry has classified at the very highest level. And that should you place your hand into my private recollections and encounter something your clearance does not permit you to have seen, the resulting inquiry would be, I think, more trouble to you than to me. But by all means, inspect away. It was a bluff stacked on a threat stacked on a truth, and it was beautiful, and Harry watched Umbridge weigh it, watched the calculation move behind the wide flat eyes, the desire to catch them against the fear of what she might be caught having seen, and watched the fear win as Severus had known it would, because Umbridge was a creature of the Ministry, and the Ministry's secrets were the one thing that frightened her more than disobedience. "I shall be reporting the use of the instrument," she said, retreating into procedure, which was what people did when they had lost and would not admit it. "And I shall be reviewing the necessity of these sessions with the headmaster." "Closely, Professor, very closely." Her eyes moved once more between them, teacher and student, the desk, the basin, and something in them was not satisfied, would never be satisfied, had scented that there was a thing here she had not been allowed to find. "Good evening," she went. The door swung shut. Harry let go of the bright cold minute and came back into himself and discovered his good hand had gripped the edge of the desk hard enough to ache. "That was close," Harry said. "That was nothing," Severus said, sitting back down, though the tightness around his eyes said otherwise. "That was a skirmish. But you held your mind, Potter, under her gaze, with the truth straining at the seams, and you gave her not one thread of it. That is the first thing you have done in this room that may actually keep us both alive." He looked at Harry across the desk, and the look had weight. "She will go to the headmaster, and he will manage her, because managing people is the one talent he has never lost. But she has scented something, and she will not stop, and the next time she comes she will be cleverer. So we will be cleverer still. We will move the lessons. We will give her a different thing to find, a small irregularity she can catch us at, something harmless, so that her hunting hound has a fox and stops sniffing at the real burrow. I will arrange it." He almost smiled, the grim ghost of it. "You are learning, Potter, the central principle of survival in a place like this, which is that the safest secret is the one guarded by a lesser secret left carelessly in plain view. Your mother never grasped it. She was too honest. It is, I begin to suspect, the one useful thing you may have inherited from me." Harry gathered his bag, the murtlap jar of familiar weight in it now, the parchment of the blood adoption right against his chest beside his mother's letter, the bright cold minute folded safe in the back of his mind, and went to the door. He stopped there, as he always seemed to now, on the threshold where the unsayable things got said. "I worked out what Hermione found," he said, "a way to make it real properly, so nobody can hide it or take it again. I'm not asking yet. I don't even know if we, I just wanted you to know there's a way, when we're ready, if we're ever ready." Severus was quiet a long moment, and the fire ticked, and the dungeon held them both in its old cold warmth. "I know the right you mean," he said at last. "I have known of it since the goblins. I have been waiting, Potter, for you to find it on your own, because a thing like that cannot be offered without becoming an obligation, and you have had enough obligations laid on you without your consent to last several lifetimes. So I have waited, and I will go on waiting however long it takes until the day, if it comes, when you walk down here and ask me freely, with no one's hand on your shoulder but your own." "And on that day," he said, and his voice did not waver, which was how Harry knew it was the truest thing Severus had ever said to him, "I will not make you ask twice." Harry nodded because his throat had closed, and went up the dark stairs to the tower with the whole impossible weight of it, and for the first time since the hospital wing the weight did not feel only like a burden. Some of it, he was beginning to understand, was the weight of being wanted, which he had carried so rarely that he had mistaken it, at first, for just another thing pressing down. It was not. It was the opposite of the cupboard. It was a thing being held up against gravity by someone who had decided to. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, The Arithmetic of Sacrifice. The thing that had been said in the headmaster's office at the very end, the door behind the door, would not let Severus alone. Why did you need to change him and not merely hide him? He had asked it on instinct, the way a man worries a loose tooth, and Dumbledore had not answered, and the not answering had taken up residence in Severus and grown, through the lengthening November nights, into a certainty that the worst of it was still ahead. He knew the difference between a seal and a glamour. He had said it to Dumbledore's face. A seal hides a fact from those who would look it up. It is a lock on a drawer. A third-tier paternity charm does something else entirely. It reaches into the living magic of a person and rewrites it, and a rewriting of that depth, sustained across 15 years, does not merely conceal. It shapes. Severus had spent his adult life in the company of magic that altered what it touched, and he knew, with the cold instinct of his craft, that a charm worked that deep into a growing child would have left fingerprints not only on the records but on Harry himself, on how his magic had set as it matured, the way a splint sets a bone to grow in a chosen direction. So he went looking. Not to Dumbledore, who would only arrange the truth again, but to the one place in the castle that kept its memories, whether the living wished it or not. The headmaster's office was empty on the Thursday evening Severus chose. Dumbledore gone again to London, and the gargoyle knew Severus's voice as a senior member of the staff and let him pass, which was a liberty he would pay for later and did not care about now. He went not to the desk, but to the wall of portraits, to the frame second from the window where Phineas Nigellus Black dozed in painted disapproval, the most recently dead but one of the headmasters, and the most reliably indiscreet, because spite had outlived him, and a portrait will trade in spite long after it has forgotten everything else. "Wake up, Phineas," Severus said. The portrait opened one eye. "Snape, the half-blood. Come to brood in the dark like the rest of them. What do you want?" "Information. You were on this wall in the autumn after the Potters died. You saw who came and went from this office. You saw what Dumbledore did with the Potter child's affairs in that first year." Severus kept his voice level, conversational, the tone that worked best on portraits who responded to flattery and to the suggestion that they alone possessed a thing worth having. "You always saw everything, Phineas. You complained of it endlessly." "The boring traffic of a headmaster's office. Tell me what you saw." "Everyone wants the Potter business," Phineas said, and yawned theatrically, a dead man performing boredom. "I suppose you think you are clever, coming when he is out. He knows everything that is said in this room, you understand. The portraits report. We are loyal to the office, not to the wizard who holds it, but it amounts to the same thing while he holds the office." A sly painted pause. "Though I have always found that loyalty to an office leaves a great deal of room for the settling of private scores. What is it worth to you, half-blood, my recollection of a winter 15 years gone?" "Your portrait hangs in two places," Severus said. "Here, and in a house you would very much like to know the current condition of. I am one of the few living who has been inside that house lately. Tell me what I want, and I will tell you how your old home fares, and whether your particular descendants have let it fall to ruin, which I suspect will give you either great satisfaction or great pain, and either way you want to know." The portrait considered this and found it a fair trade, because portraits are vain and lonely and starved for news of the houses they have lost. "Very well," Phineas said. "The winter after the Potters. He brought the child here once before he placed it with the Muggles. A great fuss of secrecy, and he was not alone. There was the painted brow furrowed, dredging, a man from St. Mungo's, a charms specialist, the sort the old families used to hire when an heir's parentage wanted adjusting. They were closeted here a full night. There was a great deal of magic done over the child, deep magic, the kind that makes the instruments sing, and the child cried the whole night through, the way they do when the magic goes into the marrow, and Dumbledore held it and did not let the specialist stop, though the specialist warned him more than once that what they were doing was, Phineas savored the word, excessive, that a simple concealment would have sufficed for protection. That what Dumbledore was asking went beyond hiding the child's blood and into, the specialist's phrase, binding its inheritance. Severus had gone very still. Binding its inheritance, those were the words. I remember because the specialist was frightened, and frightened men are interesting, they are the only honest ones. He said it was not necessary for protection, what Dumbledore wanted. And Dumbledore said, and here Phineas dropped into a fair imitation of the gentle voice, relishing it, he said, it is not for protection alone. It is so that the child will grow toward what it must become, and away from what it must not. A boy raised by his true father would grow attached to living. This boy cannot afford attachments. He must belong to no one so that when the time comes he belongs only to the task. And the specialist did the work because Dumbledore paid him and frightened him and was never seen again that I know of, and the child stopped crying near dawn, and that was the end of it. The portrait yawned again. Now, my house, half-blood, you promised, is the drawing-room still as that dreadful black woman left it. But Severus was no longer in the room, not in any way that mattered. He had braced on the long walk up the spiral stair for a confirmation of cruelty, for the calculating coldness he had already named in Dumbledore's office. He had not braced for this. He stood in the dark before the portrait of a dead man and heard, 15 years too late, the sentence that explained the whole architecture of his son's wrecked childhood, and it was worse than cruelty, because cruelty at least wants something for itself. This had wanted nothing for itself. This had been husbandry. So that the child will grow toward what it must become. Dumbledore had not merely hidden Harry from Severus and from Voldemort. He had reached into the marrow of a 1-year-old and bound him to grow up unloved and unattached and alone on purpose, by design, because an unloved child fears death less, and Dumbledore had needed a boy who would not fear when the time came to walk toward it. The drawing room, Severus said distantly to the portrait, because he was a man who paid his debts even when the world had ended, is unchanged. The house is ill-kept but standing. Your descendants are a disappointment to you, as you suspected. Good night, Phineas. And he went down the stair into the dark with the sentence ringing in him like a struck bell, and he did not go to his quarters because he could not have borne the 4 walls of them. and instead he walked the cold corridors of the castle for hours, a thin black figure passing through pools of torchlight, working out with the part of his mind that never stopped working even when the rest of him had been hollowed, what the sentence meant and what it would cost, and what now he was going to have to do about it. He did not tell Harry at once. That was the difficulty, and he turned it over for 2 days, because telling Harry that the wizard they had all built their lives around intended, in some not distant future, to spend him like a coin, was not a thing one said carelessly, and because Severus had spent the autumn learning the hard discipline of not deciding for Harry what Harry could bear to know. In the end the discipline won as it had to, because to keep this from him would be to do the precise thing Dumbledore had done, to manage a person for his own good, and Severus had developed, he was discovering, an almost physical revulsion at the prospect of becoming, in any particular, the master he had served. So he told him. In the dungeon on the next lesson evening, with the door warded twice over and a silencing charm laid for good measure, Severus set it out plainly, the portrait, the charms specialist, the sentence, he must belong to no one, so that when the time comes he belongs only to the task, and he watched his son receive it, and it was one of the harder hours of Severus's life, which was a life not short of hard hours. Harry did not rage this time. That was the thing Severus noted and would remember. The rage had been in the headmaster's office when the wound was the stolen years. This was a deeper cut, and it went past rage into a terrible quiet, and the quiet was so like Severus's own that he recognized every stage of it crossing his son's face. Harry sat with it. He looked at the fire, and when he spoke his voice was steady and far too old. The prophecy, Harry said, the thing he's never told me. The reason Voldemort came for us. It's about me having to be the one, isn't it? That's what the task is. He's known since I was a baby that it would come down to me and Voldemort, one of us, and he raised me. The steadiness cracked once and held. He raised me to be able to die for it. He made sure I'd be the kind of person who'd walk into it, alone, unattached, not minding too much about living because nobody ever gave me a reason to. I believe so, Severus said. There was no kindness in lying about it, and he did not try. I do not know the prophecy's words. He has never trusted me with them, which tells its own story. But I know the shape of his planning now, and the shape is exactly what you describe. He has kept you alive, Potter, with great care, the way a man keeps alive a thing he intends to use. And he has kept you isolated and undefended and starved of attachment with equal care, so that when he requires you to make the final attachment, the one to the task itself, the one that ends in your death, there will be nothing pulling the other way. Severus's hands were flat on the desk and very still. He raised you, in short, the way one raises a pig for slaughter. I am sorry. There is no gentler way to say a thing that has no gentle shape. The fire ticked. Somewhere far off in the castle, a clock told an hour neither of them counted. And then I found out I had a father, Harry said slowly, working it through, the cold clear working that Severus had taught him without meaning to. Which is the one thing that ruins his whole plan, because now there's something pulling the other way. Now I'm attached. Now I've got a reason to want to live and to fight to come back instead of walking and expecting not to. That's why the glamour was decaying and he never fixed it, why he let it fall apart. Harry's eyes came up sharp. Number he didn't let it, he'd have fixed it if he could. It fell apart on its own because I'm coming into my full magic, and a charm laid on a baby can't hold against a grown wizard's core. He lost control of it, that's why he was so in his office, that's why he gave us the letter and admitted the war part so readily. He was getting ahead of a thing that had already escaped him, managing the damage. He never meant for us to know, ever. He meant me to go to the end of it never knowing I had anyone, because that was the whole point. Severus looked at his son across the desk, at the green eyes doing the cold arithmetic that should have been beyond a boy of 15 and was not beyond this one, because this one had been built by the same forces that built Severus, isolation and danger, and the early hard knowledge that the adults in charge were not to be trusted, and he felt something he had no intention of naming move in him, a fierce and frightening thing. The thing a parent feels the first time it understands that the world means harm to its child, and that it stands, however inadequately, between the two. Yes, Severus said, that is precisely it. You have understood it faster and more completely than I did, which does not surprise me, because it is your life he was arithmeticking, and a man does his sharpest thinking about the noose meant for his own neck. He leaned forward. Now understand the rest of it, Potter, because it changes what we do. He did not count on you having a father because he had made certain you would not. He is, at this moment, recalculating. A man like Dumbledore does not abandon a plan he believes the world depends upon, he adapts it. And the adaptation he will reach for, the obvious one, the one I would reach for in his place, is to remove the attachment he failed to prevent, to separate us again, quietly. For the greater good, not by undoing what we know, that horse has bolted, but by making certain I am not here, that I am sent somewhere useful and distant and dangerous, that the spy is spent on some errand from which the spy does not return, leaving you once more with no one pulling the other way and a grief conveniently to make you brave. His mouth was a thin line. He will frame it as the war, it will even be the war. And it will also be the quiet removal of the one variable that threatens his arithmetic. I have watched him do exactly this to other men. I did not understand until tonight that I was watching a method. The summons came from Dumbledore 4 days later, and it came, exactly as Severus had predicted, dressed as the war. "Sit, Severus." The office was warm, the instruments whirring their contented little song, Fawkes bright on his perch, and Dumbledore behind the desk with a map unrolled before him in the particular brisk gravity he wore when he wanted a thing, and meant to make the wanting feel like duty. "I will not waste your evening with sweets you never take. There is a matter of some delicacy, and you are the only man living I can ask. Karkaroff is dead, you know that. The network he left behind in the East, the contacts among the old Durmstrang families who knew Voldemort in his wandering years, has gone dark, and I have reason to believe one of them holds knowledge I require, knowledge of where Voldemort went and what he made of himself in the years he was thought gone. I need someone to go, someone trusted on both sides of a very old fence. It would be a matter of months. It would be dangerous in ways I will not insult you by minimizing. And it would, I am afraid, mean leaving the castle and Harry for the duration." The blue eyes were mild and steady and entirely without apology. "I know your circumstances have changed. I would not ask if the need were not great, but the need is great, and you are uniquely suited, and the war, Severus, does not pause for any man's late discovered fatherhood." And there it was, laid on the desk between them, beautiful in its construction, the request that was also a removal, the errand that was also an exile, the war that was also the quiet excision of the one variable the old man's arithmetic could not abide. Months away, dangerous in ways not to be minimized. And Harry left once more, with no one pulling the other way, and a grief in the post should the errand go as such errands tended to go. Severus looked at the map and at the old man and felt the cold thing in him that took the place of fear settle into a clear, hard certainty. "No," he said. Dumbledore's eyebrows rose a fraction. It had been a long time, Severus suspected, since anyone had simply said no to him in that room unhedged, without the throat-clearing and the reasons. "I will not pretend to misunderstand you, Albus, so do me the courtesy of not pretending to misunderstand me. You do not need me in the East. Or if you do, you need me there a great deal less than you need me gone from here. I have served you 14 years. I know the difference between an errand you require and an errand you have constructed. This is the second kind. You learned 6 weeks ago that the child you raised to be unattached has formed an attachment you did not plan for and cannot now prevent, and it troubles your some, because an attached boy fights to live, and a boy who fights to live is harder to spend. So you reach for the obvious remedy. You remove the attachment. Not crudely, you would never be crude. You send it east on a worthy mission for the war, with every reason sound and every reason true, and if it does not come back, well, that is the cost of war, and the sum is balanced again." Severus did not raise his voice. He never did, for the things that mattered most. "I have watched you do this. I did not have the word for it before. The word is husbandry, Albus. Phineas remembered the night you did it to him in his cradle. He must belong to no one, so that when the time comes he belongs only to the task. Those were your words over a crying infant. I have them now. So do not sit there and ask me to go east for the war. Ask me if you have the nerve to go east so that my son will die more conveniently. I will give you the same answer, but at least we will both know what was said." The whirring of the instruments was very loud in the silence that followed. Dumbledore did not bluster. He did not deny. He set down the quill he had been holding and looked at Severus for a long moment with something in the old face that was not quite shame and was not quite respect, and partook of both. And when he spoke his voice had lost its brisk gravity and gone quiet and very tired, the voice of a man who has carried a thing alone so long that being seen carrying it is its own peculiar relief. "You have grown dangerous, Severus," he said. "You always were clever. You were not before dangerous to me. Love has made you dangerous, which is the oldest story there is, and I should have remembered it, and I did not, because I had arranged matters so that you would have nothing left to love." He folded his hands. "I will not send you east. The need is real, but it is not so real as that, and you have named the rest of it correctly, and I find I have not quite enough of the monster left in me to do the thing now that you have said it aloud in this room. That is a weakness. I have spent a long life learning to do necessary things despite my weaknesses, and I am, tonight, too old and too tired to manage it. So, stay, be his father. I will recalculate around it as I must, because the war is still coming and the prophecy is still true, and none of your fatherhood changes what he was born to do. The steel came back into the tiredness, gentle and absolute. But understand me, Severus, I will let you give him a reason to live. I will not let that reason stop him from doing what only he can do when the hour comes. If it comes to a choice between your son's life and the end of Voldemort, I will choose as I have always chosen, and you will hate me, and you will be right to, and it will not change my hand. I tell you this plainly so that you cannot say after that I deceived you. I have deceived you enough. I know exactly what you are, Severus said, rising. I have always known. I simply did not know until this autumn that I was one of the things you were doing it to. He went to the door and paused and did not turn. He will live, Albus, whatever your sum says. I have spent my life on the losing side of your arithmetic, and I am tired of it, and I am going to spend whatever I have left proving it wrong by one. You may write that into your calculations or not, as you please. He left. The stair carried him down, and behind him, in the warm, bright office, an old man sat alone among his whirring instruments and looked at a map he no longer needed and did not, for once, have a single move prepared. Harry told Ron that night, the part that could be told, which was most of it now, because the secret of his blood was Snape's secret to guard, but the prophecy and the plan and the long cold shape of how he had been raised were Harry's own, and he found he could not carry them up the tower stairs one more night without setting them down somewhere. They sat in the dormitory with the hangings drawn and a muffling charm Hermione had taught them holding the words inside the circle of 3, and Harry laid it out. Not whose son he was, that door stayed shut, but the rest, the glamour, the binding, the sentence about a child who must belong to no one, the recalculating old man 2 floors up who had raised him careful and starved and alone for a purpose Harry was only now allowed to glimpse. Ron listened the whole way through without once interrupting, which for Ron was a feat of love, and when Harry finished Ron was quiet a moment, his ears red, his jaw working, and then he said with a flat fury that was somehow steadier than any shout, "Right. So he, Dumbledore, the bloke we're all supposed to, he raised you like that on purpose. So you'd be easier to, he could not say it, easier to lose, when the time came." "Yeah," Harry said, "that's about the size of it." "That's the worst thing I've ever heard," Ron said. "And my family's poor and I've got 6 siblings and I share everything I own. I know about not getting enough, I'm not, but nobody ever planned it for me. Nobody sat down and decided Ron Weasley should grow up unloved so he'd be useful dead." He scrubbed a hand over his face. "Well, he miscalculated, didn't he? Because you're not unloved, you giant prat. You've got me and you've got Hermione, who's frankly terrifying and on your side, which is the best possible combination, and now you've got—" Ron stopped and looked at Harry, and some understanding passed over his freckled face, because Ron was not clever like Hermione, but he was not stupid either, and he had noticed where Harry's evenings went and how Harry had stopped flinching at a certain name. "You've got whoever it is you go down to the dungeons to see twice a week and won't talk about, haven't you?" "That's the bit you can't tell me. That's the bit I can't tell you," Harry agreed. "Don't then." "I don't need it." Ron lay back on his bed, hands behind his head, and stared at the canopy. "Just whoever it is, if they're on your side. If they're giving you a reason to come back from whatever mad thing you're going to throw yourself into, because you always throw yourself into something, a crooked grin, then I'm glad, that's all. I'm glad somebody finally gave you a reason. You've gone 15 years without one and it's about time." He yawned enormously. The matter settled in his mind the way things settled in Ron's mind, completely and without reservation once decided. Hermione, who had come up under the cloak against every rule precisely because she had known this was the night Harry would finally say it all aloud, sat on the end of Ron's bed with her arms around her knees and her chin set in the particular way that meant she had been thinking 3 steps past everyone else and had reached a conclusion she did not like. "The thing that frightens me," she said quietly, "isn't even what he did to you, Harry, though that's monstrous. It's that he's clever. Voldemort is cruel, but cruelty makes mistakes. Cruelty gets impatient. Dumbledore is patient and kind and absolutely certain he's right, and that's so much harder to fight because he'll let you win the small arguments, he'll even apologize, and all the while the big shape of the thing goes exactly where he meant it to. You can't out-argue someone like that. You can only refuse to be moved. And the only way to refuse to be moved," she looked at Harry fierce, "is to have something he can't take, something outside his board entirely." Which she didn't finish because she half knew what Harry had and would not make him say it, "which I think you might be getting. Whatever it is you won't tell us, I hope it's strong enough. I've read what he's capable of arranging. It would need to be very strong." "It's strong," Harry said. "It's the strongest thing I've ever had." "Good," Hermione said simply and unfolded herself and gathered the cloak. "Then he's already lost the part that matters, even if he doesn't know it yet. People who plan everything can't account for the things people choose freely. It's the one variable they always leave out because they'd never do it themselves." She paused at the edge of the hangings. My mum says the cruelest people are the ones who have decided they know best, because they never doubt so they never stop. I used to think she was being dramatic. I don't anymore. Now go to sleep. You've got that face you get before you do something reckless, and I'd like one night's kip before it if it's all the same. Harry lay back in the dark, the muffling charm still holding, his two friends breathing in the room around him, the myrtlap in the daisy and his mother's letter in the chest at the foot of his bed, and thought that Dumbledore had got one thing exactly wrong in all his careful arithmetic. He had built a child to belong to no one. And that child had gone and belonged to everyone anyway, to Ron and Hermione and a sour, brilliant, wounded man in the dungeons, had reached out and made himself a family in defiance of every plan laid to prevent it, and that Harry thought, sliding toward the first easy sleep he had managed in weeks, was the one sum nobody got to balance for him. That one was his. The Ministry's interest arrived, as such things do, wrapped in courtesy and bearing a seal. It came as a summons, delivered to Severus by an officious junior from the Department of Magical Education, requiring Professor S. Snape to present himself at a hearing of a subcommittee of the Wisengamot, the matter described only as a review of certain custodial and educational arrangements pertaining to a minor of significant public interest. The minor was not named. The minor did not need to be named. There was only one in the school of significant enough public interest to convene a subcommittee, and the date was set for a fortnight hence, and the convening member, listed in small print at the foot of the parchment, was Lucius Malfoy. Severus read it twice in the cold of his office and understood several things at once. Umbridge had reported. Of course she reported the color of the sky to the minister. She had scented something in the dungeon, the unexplained closeness, the pensive, Harry's frequent presence, and being unable to name the thing she had done the Ministry's instinctive work and passed the smell of it up the chain, and somewhere in that chain Lucius Malfoy had caught the scent and recognized it for the opportunity it was. Lucius did not know the truth. If Lucius had known the truth, that Severus Snape had a son, the information would already be in the hands of the Dark Lord, and Severus would already be dead, and the fact that he was not dead meant the secret still held. But Lucius knew there was a secret. He knew that something irregular bound Snape and the Potter boy, and Lucius Malfoy had built a career on the principle that any irregularity, dragged into the right venue under the right pressure, could be made to yield advantage. He meant to convene a hearing and to put Severus under oath and to ask questions in a public chamber until something gave. And a hearing under oath before a hostile subcommittee, with the goblin records subpoenable and the healer's diagnostic discoverable in Veritaserum a standing threat, was the one venue in which the secret could not be kept. Severus could lie to Umbridge. He could not lie to a Wisengamot inquiry that had the power to compel the goblins to produce the inheritance rolls, where the truth had sat, sealed but legible to a court, for 15 years. The moment the rolls were read aloud in that chamber, the secret would be loose, and the chamber was full of men who answered to Lucius, who answered, when it mattered, to the Dark Lord, and the news would travel from that room to the worst possible ears within the day. He went to find Harry, and he found that Hermione had gotten there first, which he was beginning to expect, and to be, in his guarded way, grateful for. She was in the dungeon corridor with Harry when Severus came down, the two of them heads together over a book, and she straightened when she saw him with the wary courtesy of a student who knows her teacher's secret and has not decided how to behave about it, and Severus, who had no patience left for the performance of authority, dispensed with it. "Miss Granger," he said, "you have evidently been told more than is prudent, which I will hold Mr. Potter accountable for at a later date. Since you know, you may as well be useful. There is a hearing. Lucius Malfoy convenes a Wisengamot subcommittee in a fortnight, ostensibly about custodial arrangements, in truth to put me under oath until the secret breaks. If it breaks in that chamber, it reaches the Dark Lord, and a great many people die, beginning with me. I require law. I require a way to make the question they intend to ask unaskable, or its answer already settled and beyond their reach before the date. You found the right, find me the rest." Hermione, to her enormous credit, did not waste a second being frightened or flattered. Her chin came up and the shine came into her eyes, and she said, "Actually, I think the right is the rest," and opened the book to a page she had clearly already found. "I've been reading the procedural side because I had a feeling something like this was coming. Listen. A Wisengamot custody inquiry can compel records and question witnesses, but, the word boxed in the air with a finger, it has no jurisdiction over a relationship already recognized by blood magic, because blood adoption predates the Wisengamot's charter. I told you that part. Here's the part I didn't say. Once a blood adoption is sealed and registered, the recognized parent has automatic, uncontestable guardianship, and crucially, the proceeding becomes moot. You can't hold a custody inquiry about a child whose guardianship is already magically and legally settled. There's nothing left to inquire into. The subcommittee would have to dissolve. And she turned the page, and registration of a blood adoption is done at Gringotts by the goblins under their seal, not the ministry's, which means Lucius Malfoy can't block it or delay it or even find out about it until it's done, because the goblins answer to no Wisengamot, and they despise being told who they may and may not register. You are saying, Severus said slowly, that if I perform the rite and register it before the hearing, then the hearing has no subject. I'm saying the hearing collapses, Hermione said, and more than that, if it's a sealed blood adoption, you control who's told. The truth becomes a registered private fact at Gringotts instead of testimony extracted in open chamber. Lucius gets nothing to put under oath because the relationship isn't a suspicious irregularity anymore. It's a lawful adoption, fully within your rights, none of his business, and the goblins will say exactly that and nothing more. It doesn't make the secret public, it makes it yours. It takes the one thing they could use against you and turns it into the one thing that makes you untouchable. She closed the book. It's the answer to both problems at once. The ministry can't take Harry, and they can't expose you because you'd have done the thing openly, on your own terms, before they ever got him in the room. The only catch, and here she hesitated and looked at Harry and her voice gentled, the only catch is that it has to be freely chosen by both of you with full intent or the magic won't seal. You can't do it to dodge a hearing. You can only do it because you mean it, and the dodging is a side effect. Blood magic knows the difference. It always knows the difference. The corridor was quiet, somewhere a torch guttered. Severus looked at Harry and Harry looked back at him, and the thing that had been built slowly between them over a season of murtlap and occlumency, an oppressed daisy in a dead woman's book stood suddenly in the cold corridor demanding to be named, ahead of its time under pressure, which was the cruelty of it, because Severus had promised himself Harry would ask freely in his own hour with no one's hand on his shoulder, and now the world had put its hand on both their shoulders and was pressing. I will not have you choose it for this reason, Severus said low to Harry as though Hermione were not there, because in that moment she was not. Do you hear me? I made you a promise. I said I would wait until you came to me freely, and I meant it, and a hearing convened by Lucius Malfoy is not freely. If you do this only to save my life and stop their inquiry, the magic will know, and it will not seal, and we will have spent the truest thing either of us has left on a piece of strategy. I would sooner sit the hearing and take my chances. I have taken worse. He held the green eyes, so I am not asking you. I am telling you the option exists, and that it must not be exercised for any reason but the real one, and that if the real one is not there, Potter, if it is not there yet, then it is not there, and that is allowed, and I will manage the hearing some other way, and you will owe me nothing. Harry was quiet for a long moment. And then he did a thing that Severus would carry to his grave, whichever grave the war eventually provided. He almost smiled, the grim crooked ghost of a smile that he had, Severus realized, learned partly from watching Severus, and he said, "You really don't get it, do you? You're the only person who's ever told me I'm allowed to say number in my whole life. Everybody else just decides things about me, Dumbledore, the Ministry, Voldemort, a prophecy I've never even heard, they all just decide, and you're standing here in a corridor with your life on the line telling me I can walk away and you'll figure it out yourself and I won't owe you anything." He shook his head. That's exactly why the answer's yes. Not to save you, though I want to. Not to stop the hearing, though I want that too. The answer's yes because you're the first one who let it be mine. And that's the realest reason there is. Severus did not trust himself to speak. He had spent 36 years building a self that did not need anyone and could not be reached. And a boy with Lily's eyes had just walked through every defense of it carrying nothing but the truth. And there was a pressure behind Severus's own eyes that he had not felt since a graveyard of the heart 15 years gone, and he mastered it, because mastering it was the only thing he knew how to do. But he did not look away, and not looking away was, for him, the loudest thing he could have done. Then we will do it properly, Severus said when he could, at Gringotts under seal. Before the hearing, so that their inquiry dies stillborn, but not for the hearing. Never tell anyone it was for the hearing, least of all yourself. We do it because it is true. He looked at Hermione, who had the grace to be studying the ceiling. Miss Granger, you will tell no one, and you will, I suppose, since you have made yourself indispensable, help us arrange it. There are forms, there are always forms. There are 17 forms, Hermione said. I've already started. And Severus Snape stood in the cold dungeon corridor between his son and his son's impossible friend, and understood that the arithmetic of Albus Dumbledore, the careful sum that had governed 3 lives for 15 years, had just acquired a variable its author had never permitted himself to imagine. a boy who had been given at last a reason to want to live, and had chosen it freely with both eyes open in a corridor under pressure against every plan that had been made for him. It would not be enough to save him from the war. Severus was not fool enough to think that. But it might, he thought, be enough to change what his son walked toward the war as. Not a thing raised for slaughter, but a son with a father waiting on the other side of it, and that, in the bleak ledger Severus had kept his whole life, was the first entry in a very long time that came out on the side of the living. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, freely given the night before, Harry could not sleep, which was nothing new, but the not sleeping had a different flavor to it, not dread but the strung-tight wakefulness of a person standing at the edge of a thing he has chosen and cannot quite believe he is allowed to choose. He had told Ron and Hermione that evening as much as he could that tomorrow a thing would happen at Gringotts that would make his family his own and put it beyond anyone's reach, and that he could not say more, and that he needed them to cover the Hogsmeade gap and ask nothing. Hermione had nodded, fierce and wet-eyed, because she had done the legal work and knew exactly what tomorrow meant and had decided weeks ago to be glad about it. Ron had clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Whoever it is, mate, I hope they know what they're getting. You're a lot of trouble," which from Ron was a blessing of the highest order, and Harry had laughed, surprised, the laugh coming out of him rusty from disuse. Now in the dark, he turned the white facts over. Tomorrow he would give his blood to a man he had hated for 5 years and would walk out the son of him by choice in the open in a register older than the ministry, where no glamour and no warrant and no twinkling old wizard could ever reach in and rearrange it again. It frightened him. He made himself look at the fright squarely, the way his father had taught him to look at things in the dungeon, and he found that the fright was not about Snape. The fright was older than Snape. It was the fright of a boy from a cupboard who had learned that to want a thing was to invite its loss, that the surest way to be hurt was to let yourself be claimed, and who was about to walk into a goblin's chamber and let himself be claimed entirely, blood and bone, with both eyes open. And under the fright, steadier than the fright, was the thing the cupboard had never managed to kill in him, the thing his mother had left in his eyes along with their color, the stubborn refusal to stop wanting better just because better had never come. He had wanted a family his whole life. He had been told in 1,000 small ways that he was not the sort of boy who got one. Tomorrow he was going to walk into a bank and prove the telling wrong. He fell asleep near dawn, holding the thin certainty of it, and did not dream, which was its own small mercy. 2 floors down, Severus did not attempt sleep at all. He sat at his desk with the 17 forms squared before him and a glass of something he did not drink, and he thought about a woman by a river, and about a promise he had made to wait until Harry came to him freely, and about how Harry had come in a corridor under pressure, and had said the answer was yes because Severus was the first to let it be his to give. He turned the glass and did not drink it. He was not a man who believed in second chances. His life had taught him that the universe dealt one hand and expected you to lose it gracefully. And yet here was a thing that had every appearance of a second chance, walking and breathing and impertinent and asleep 2 floors above him, and Severus found that he did not trust it and wanted it anyway, and that the wanting, after a lifetime of refusing himself the luxury, was the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to him, more than the Dark Lord, more than Dumbledore, more than the long cold years of the double game. He let himself want. It was the bravest thing he did all autumn, and no one would ever know he had done it, and that was, he reflected, rather the story of his life. They went to Gringotts on a Saturday on the pretext of a Hogsmeade weekend, Severus signing Harry out under a fiction about a disciplinary errand to the bank regarding a confiscated item, a fiction so dull that Umbridge waved it through without reading it, which was the entire art of a good fiction, to be too boring to inspect. The right chamber beneath the bank was the same low round room of black stone where Severus had heard, weeks before, the words that had ended his old life, and it was colder than he remembered, or perhaps he only felt the cold more keenly now that he had something to lose in it. The same right keeper waited beside the same basin, and there were forms, as Severus had promised, 17 of them, witnessed and sealed and countersealed, Hermione's careful preparation reduced at last to wax and goblin script, and then the forms were done and there was nothing left but the thing itself. "You understand the nature of the right keeper said, in the flat voice of a creature that had performed it 1,000 times and would perform it 1,000 more. It is not a charm laid upon you. It is a truth spoken in blood, and blood does not lie and cannot be made to. If the intent is false, the right does not seal, and you will know it has not sealed, and there is no shame in it, and the fee is forfeit regardless. If the intent is true, it binds, and the binding is permanent and supersedes all prior workings, including the glamour whose shadow we have already found in the rolls. The child's blood will surface as it truly is. Do you both consent freely, knowing this? I consent, Severus said. I consent, Harry said. Then give me your hands, the right, both of you. Severus gave his. And Harry, after the smallest hesitation, gave his right hand, the scarred one, the one that said I must not tell lies in raised pale script, and the right keeper looked at the words on the back of the hand for a moment with an expression that on a human face would have been something, and on a goblin's was unreadable, and then it laid the two hands palm to palm, Severus's long-stained fingers against the cool of his son's, and bound them at the wrist with a cord of something that was not quite rope and not quite light, and drew the pale sliver across both palms in a single line so that the cut was shared, one wound across two hands, and the blood ran together in the seam between them. The cold in the chamber deepened the way it had before, the old stone turning to watch, but this time it was not the indifferent attention of a fact being recorded. This time the magic reached up into the joined hands and asked its question, and the question went past every wall Harry had ever built, past the occlumency, past the cupboard doors and the bright cold minute on the broom, all the way down to the place where a person keeps the answer to who do you belong to, and Harry, who had spent his whole life belonging to no one because no one had ever truly claimed him, felt the question arrive and felt himself, for once, with no hesitation and no fear. Well, answer it. Him, Harry thought into the cold and the joined blood. I choose him, whatever he is, whatever he's done. He's the one who let it be mine to choose, and I choose it. And on the other side of the joined hands, Severus Snape, who had not let himself want anything since a woman with green eyes had stopped loving him in a corridor 30 years gone, felt the right ask its question of him too, and felt himself answer with a completeness that frightened him, because there was no armor anywhere in the answer, no irony, no reservation held back against betrayal. Mine, he thought, into the blood. He is mine. Not Lily's last gift, not Dumbledore's instrument, not the Dark Lord's prophecy. Mine. My son, and I will burn down the world before I let any of them spend him. The cord of not quite light flared white, and the cold became, for one impossible instant, warm and the right sealed. Harry felt it go through him like a current, a settling, a thing clicking into a place that had been empty his whole life, and aching with the emptiness without his ever knowing the ache had a shape. And then it was done, and the cord unwound itself and vanished, and the cut on his palm closed to a thin white line that matched the thin white line on Severus's, the only mark the right left, a scar they would each carry that no one else would understand. The right keeper examined the basin, where the joined blood had bloomed into shapes only it could read. It is sealed, it said, witnessed and recorded under the seal of the bank this day, beyond the reach of any wizard court. He is your son in blood and in law, and in the deeper register that wizards have no word for and goblins do not share. The glamour is gone, its shadow is struck from the rolls. There is one effect you should know of. It looked at Harry. The right surfaces the true blood. You have worn another man's face in small ways your whole life, the cast the glamour gave you. That will fade now, not greatly. You will not become a stranger in your mirror. But over the coming weeks you will see your true line come up under the skin, and those who knew your face before may find they cannot say quite what has changed, only that something has. I tell you so that it does not frighten you when it begins. They climbed up into the gray diagon morning, the two of them, with a thin white scar each across the right palm and a thing settled between them that no hearing could now unsettle. And at the top of the white steps Harry stopped and looked at the figure beside him, his father, the word no longer grinding, and found that he had nothing to say that the right had not already said better, and so he said nothing, and Severus, understanding, said nothing back. And the nothing between them was the fullest silence either of them had ever stood inside. The hearing collapsed exactly as Hermione had said it would, which gave her a satisfaction she tried and failed to keep off her face when Harry reported it. Lucius Malfoy convened his subcommittee in a cold ministry chamber on the appointed day, and Severus attended, because to fail to attend would have suggested he had something to flee, and he sat under the hostile gaze of a dozen Wisengamot members hand-picked for their pliability, and he waited for Lucius to spring the trap, and Lucius rose, silver-tongued and certain, and began to lay out his case, the irregular closeness, the unexplained sessions. The question of whether the Potter boys' custodial arrangements were being conducted with proper ministry oversight, the suggestion, delicate and poisonous, that something improper bound the professor and the student and wanted airing under oath. And the goblin liaison from Gringotts, summoned as a matter of routine to certify Harry's financial guardianship for the record, rose when called and produced a sealed certification and read it into the record in a flat carrying voice. That Harry James Potter had on the preceding Saturday, by the ancient right of blood adoption, witnessed and sealed beyond appeal, become the recognized son and ward of Severus Snape, that the guardianship was therefore settled in magic and in law older than the Wisengamot's charter, and that the present inquiry concerning custodial arrangements had no subject, the arrangements being no longer in question and no longer any business of the committee or the ministry it served. Severus watched Lucius Malfoy's certainty come apart in real time, and it was, he would admit later to no one, one of the more satisfying spectacles of his adult life. Lucius had come to expose a scandalous secret and had been handed, instead, a lawful adoption, fully documented, entirely within Severus's rights, that explained the closeness as the most ordinary thing in the world, a father and his son, and left nothing whatsoever to put under oath. The subcommittee, deprived of its subject, had no choice but to dissolve. The trap had been sprung on empty air. And Lucius, who was no fool, looked across the chamber at Severus with the cold reassessing stare of a man who has realized that his opponent moved first and moved better, and that there was, beneath the lawful surface, still a secret here, only now it was sealed behind goblin law where Lucius could not reach it, which was somehow worse, because a known secret can be used, and a sealed one can only be rescented. "My congratulations, Severus," Lucius said afterward in the corridor, soft, venomous, the courtesy of a serpent. "On your family, how very sudden. How very convenient, the timing." His pale eyes searched Severus's face for a crack and found the old smooth nothing that 14 years of spycraft had perfected. "One wonders what would move a man like you, so famously attached to nothing, to bind himself so suddenly to the Potter boy. One wonders what the Dark Lord would make of it." "One is welcome to wonder aloud to him," Severus said, with the bored contempt that was his armor and his art. "I have adopted the brat on the headmaster's instruction, Lucius, the better to watch him, the better to own him, the better to deliver him when the hour comes. Dumbledore trusts a guardian where he would not trust a spy. I have made myself the brat's legal father so that there is no door of his life I cannot open. You imagine I have grown sentimental, I have grown useful, but by all means carry your wondering to our master. Tell him his servant has placed himself inside the Potter boy's very guardianship, with full legal authority over his movements and his person, against the day it is wanted. See whether he thanks you for the news or asks why you did not think of it yourself." It was the most dangerous lie Severus had ever told, because it was built entirely of true facts arranged to mean their opposite, and he told it without a flicker and watched it land and watched Lucius reassess once more. The suspicion not gone but redirected, turned from Snape has betrayed us for love towards Snape has outmaneuvered us for advantage, which was a thing the Death Eaters could understand and even admire, and which bought, Severus judged, a few more months of the secret holding. A few more months, it was the currency he had always dealt in. It had never felt so thin. Dumbledore sent for him the evening after the hearing, and Severus went up the spiral stair knowing exactly what the summons was about, because the goblin certification had been read into a ministry record, and the headmaster missed nothing that touched the Potter boy. "You performed the rite," Dumbledore said. He did not offer sweets. He sat with his ruined, blackened hand resting on the desk, the hand Severus had bought him a year's grace from with a curse-staying potion, and his face was grave and unreadable. "A blood adoption, sealed beyond appeal, without consulting me." "I did," Severus said, "and I did not consult you. Number, I am aware that this is a novelty in our long association. I am aware that for 14 years I have brought you every significant decision of my life for your weighing, because you held the one thing I cared about and I dared not move without your leave. That is finished, Albus. I have a thing of my own now, sealed in goblin law that you cannot take and cannot rearrange and cannot use, and I find the having of it has changed what I am willing to ask your permission for. The answer, going forward, is very little. You understand what you have done." Dumbledore's voice was quiet, and the steel in it was quiet too, which was when it cut deepest. "You have made yourself in law and in blood the father of the one child whose destiny I have spent 15 years arranging. You have given a weapon a reason to want to survive its own use. Do you imagine I am pleased?" "I imagine you are recalculating," Severus said. "You told me you would. You told me in this room that you would let me give him a reason to live, but not let that reason stop him doing what only he can do. I have not forgotten. I am not here to plead with you to spare him. I learned long ago that your arithmetic does not bend to pleading. I am here to tell you what has changed on my side of the board, so that you cannot say after that I deceived you, since you were so insistent on that courtesy yourself." He stepped closer to the desk, and he did not raise his voice, and the not raising was its own kind of violence. "I have served you faithfully, Albus, through things that would have broken other men, because you gave me a purpose when I had none, and I believed, God help me, that the purpose was hers. The purpose was never hers. The purpose was your war, and I was a tool you kept sharp by keeping me wounded. I know that now. And I am telling you that I will go on fighting your war, because the Dark Lord must fall, and I am useful in the falling of him, and I do not break a thing I have given my word to. But I will fight it as a free man now, not a grieving instrument. My loyalty to the cause is unchanged. My obedience to you is over. And if your arithmetic ever again requires my son's death as a line in its sum, you will discover that there is one variable in this war you have never accounted for, because you arranged from his cradle that it should not exist, and it exists now, and it is a father, and it will not be quiet. The instrument's word. Fawkes turned his bright head, and Albus Dumbledore looked at the servant he had made and the father he had failed to prevent, and something moved in the ancient face that might in a younger man have been grief, and might in this one have been only the recognition of a peace that had at last slipped his control. You have become, Dumbledore said slowly, very like me. Did you know that? A man who will do terrible things for love and call them necessity. I had hoped to spare you that. I see now that I am the one who taught it to you. He sighed, and it was the sigh of a very old and very tired man, and for once it did not seem performed. Keep your son, Severus. I will not move against the adoption. I could not unmake it if I wished, and I do not wish whatever you believe of me. But understand that the war will ask of him what it will ask, and that neither your love nor mine will alter the shape of what is coming. I have arranged a great deal. I have never once managed to arrange the ending. That, it seems, belongs to the children. Then perhaps, Severus said at the door, you should have spent less effort arranging them and more trusting them. Good night, headmaster. And he went down the stair a free man for the first time in 14 years, and the freedom was cold and frightening and entirely his own, and he would not have traded it for any comfort the old man had ever offered. The change in Harry's face came on slowly, over the weeks after the rite, exactly as the goblin had said it would. It was nothing dramatic. Harry would not have noticed it himself, except that he had been warned to watch, and so he watched in the cracked dormitory mirror in the grey mornings, and saw it arrive by degrees. The jaw a little leaner, a little more definite. The brow settling into a line that had always been there but now declared itself, the line Harry had seen on his father's face in the dungeon lamplight and never on James Potter's in any photograph. His coloring stayed, his mother's red undertone in the brown of his hair, her green in his eyes, those were hers, and the right left them untouched because they had always been true. But the architecture under them shifted, week on week, away from the borrowed Potter softness the glamour had painted and toward something sharper and more guarded, and Harry thought, studying it, more his, the face of a person who came from two specific people, and not from a convenient public story. Ron noticed without knowing what he noticed, which was precisely what the goblin had predicted. You look different, he said one morning, frowning at Harry over his toast. Older, or I dunno, sharper. Have you got taller? You look like you've decided something. He shrugged, defeated by it. Suits you anyway. You used to look sort of haunted. Now you look like you'd give the haunting back. Hermione, who knew exactly what she was seeing, said nothing, but Harry caught her looking more than once with an expression of careful wonder, watching a stolen truth come up through a boy's face into the open at last, 15 years late, and not one soul in the great hall able to say what had changed, only that the Potter boy, who had always seemed to be carrying something too heavy for him, had begun, somehow, to set it down. It was on one of those late evenings, with Harry bent over the pensive and Severus marking by the fire, that the mark burned. Severus knew it before the pain finished arriving, the old black ache crawling up the inside of his left forearm, the summons that had ruled the worst years of his life and ruled them still. He set down his quill slowly, so that Harry would not see his hand move wrong, and rose and reached for his traveling cloak, and Harry looked up from the silver light and read the whole of it in the set of his father's shoulders, because Harry had grown frighteningly good this autumn at reading the bodies of people who hid things. He's calling you, Harry said, Voldemort right now. He is. Severus fastened the cloak. It is nothing unusual. He calls when he is bored or frightened or wishes to remind us that he can. I will go and I will kneel and I will tell him useful lies and I will come back. I have done it 100 times. But it's different now, Harry said, standing, because now if he gets past your walls even once, he doesn't just find a spy. He finds out you've got a son, he finds out it's me, and then you're dead and he stopped. Every single time you go now, you're carrying the one thing that gets you killed if he sees it. You weren't before you had nothing he could use, now you've got me. Yes, Severus said. There was no point in softening it. Harry had earned the truth and would see through anything less. Now I have you, and you are the one thought I must never have where he can find it, and I will go down to him tonight with my mind a clean cold blank, and I will not think of you, not once, not in the smallest corner, because the smallest corner is exactly where he looks. I have spent the autumn learning to keep you in the front of my mind. Tonight I must learn to put you so far behind the wall that even I cannot find you. It is the hardest occlumency there is, Potter, to hide a thing from your enemy that has become the center of your own self. He drew on his gloves. Which is why I have made you practice it so cruelly. I was not only teaching you to keep him out of your head, I was teaching myself in the watching how to bury the one thing in mine. We have been protecting each other this whole time, you and I, and neither of us said so. Harry crossed the room, and for a moment it looked as if he would do something, hold him, stop him, and then he did the harder thing, the thing his father would have done, and simply stood and said, in a voice scraped steady, "Come back." "That's all, whatever you have to think or not think down there, just come back. I've had enough people not come back." "I intend to," Severus said. "I have recently acquired a reason." And he touched Harry's shoulder once, hard, the grip that laid claim, and then he was gone into the dark of the grounds and beyond the wards to apparate to whatever waited, and Harry stood at the dungeon window for 3 hours watching the black grounds and the cold stars, and did the only useful thing there was to do, which was to take the bright cold minute on the broom and build, around the thought of his father kneeling in some distant dark, a wall so complete that not even his own fear could get through it. And he held it until near 1 a.m, a thin black figure crossed the grounds again, alive, and Harry let the wall fall and discovered he had been crying for some time without noticing, and went down to open the door. The reckoning came, as these things do, from the direction no one was watching. It was Umbridge. Of course it was Umbridge. She had been thwarted twice now in the dungeon and at the hearing she had set in motion, and Dolar's Umbridge was a small woman with a large and patient appetite for the punishment of those who had made her feel small. And she had concluded in the airless logic of her kind that the Potter boy was the source of all her humiliations and that the proper response was to break him until he yielded whatever he was hiding, the location of Dumbledore's secret army, the truth of the late troubles, anything, everything. The great confession that would restore her standing with the minister. She caught Harry on a Thursday evening, in the corridor outside the defense classroom, with 2 of her inquisitorial squad, and she did not bother with a detention. She took him to her office, and she locked the door, and she set the squad to hold him, and she took from a drawer a small crystal vial of clear liquid that Harry, who had spent a season learning poisons at his father's knee, recognized at once as veritaserum, and which the use of on a student without consent was a crime that would have ended even Umbridge's career had there been anyone left in the ministry willing to call it one. "You will tell me," Umbridge said in her soft girlish voice, holding the vial up to the light, "where Dumbledore has gone and what he is planning, and what it is that you and Professor Snape have been about in those dungeons all term, because I do not for one moment believe it is remedial potions, you insolent, lying boy, and I am quite finished pretending. 3 drops, and then we will have the truth, all of it at last." 3 drops of veritaserum, and Harry would answer any question put to him, truthfully, completely, his occlumency no defense against a potion that worked on the body and not the mind, and the question, "What have you and Professor Snape been about?" would be answered with the one sentence that must never be spoken aloud: "He is my father." And that sentence in Umbridge's office would travel to the minister, and from the minister to the Wizengamot, and from there, through Lucius, to the Dark Lord within the week. The sealed adoption protected the guardianship. It did not seal Harry's tongue under a truth potion. The goblins had warned him. The right settled the law, not his own mouth. Harry did the only thing left to him. As the squad forced his head back and Umbridge advanced with the vial, he found the bright cold minute on the broom and went and stood inside it and reached, past it. For the thing the right had settled in him 6 weeks before, the click into place, the belonging, and he held with everything Severus had drilled into him through a season of cold dungeon evenings, not against a wizard's intrusion now, but against his own coming compulsion, knowing it would not be enough. Knowing veritaserum did not care how strong your walls were, but holding anyway, because holding was the last thing he owned, and he had learned from the best in Britain that you held the door even when you knew it would fall, because the seconds you bought were sometimes the only thing that mattered. The door opened, not the mental door, the actual door, the locked one, blown off its hinges with a force that flung one of the inquisitorial squad across the office and into a cabinet of decorative plates, and Severus Snape came through it. Harry had seen Snape angry. He had been the object of Snape's anger for 5 years. He had never seen this. This was not the cold venom of the classroom or the controlled fury of the headmaster's office. This was something that had stopped bothering with control, a thing that had been held down for 36 years and had found, at last, a thing worth coming all the way up for, and it filled the small pink office to the corners and made the kittens on their painted plates go still. "Take your hands off my son," Severus said. The words were out before he could weigh them, before the spy in him could calculate the cost, and the cost was enormous. The cost was everything. The secret spoken aloud in a room with 3 witnesses and a woman who lived to report. And Severus heard himself say it and did not call it back, because there are doors a man will not hold shut even to save his own life. And a son with his head forced back and a vial 3 inches from his lips was, it transpired, the door Severus Snape would not hold. The office was very quiet. Umbridge had gone still, the vial halted in the air. The squad had frozen. And into the silence, into the impossible thing that had just been said, the named feeling that Severus had kept caged his entire adult life finally got its name. And the name was fear, plain and total, not for himself, never for himself. He had stopped fearing for himself in a graveyard 15 years ago. But for the child with his head forced back, the fear of a parent who has arrived 1 second from too late. And it was the most human thing Severus had felt in a generation, and it nearly took his legs out from under him, even as it burned everything else away. "Your son," Umbridge breathed, and Harry watched the calculation begin behind the wide, flat eyes, the scandal of it, the leverage, the report already composing itself. "Professor Snape, did you say your son?" But the Potter boy's father was, "Why, this is extraordinary, the minister will be most. 3 witnesses to attempted administration of Veritaserum upon a minor without consent," Severus said, and his voice had come back under control, but it was a control laid over a fire, and everyone in the room could feel the fire under it. "A Class A restricted potion. A crime dolors under statutes the ministry itself drafted, that carries a term in Azkaban that not even Cornelius Fudge could wave you out of, because the offense is against the Child Protection Code, and the Child Protection Code is the one law the public will not forgive a ministry for breaking." He stepped fully into the room, and the squad members shrank from him, because there are people whose anger you do not stand near, and they had just learned that the dungeon bat was one of them. "Here is the arithmetic, and I will do it slowly for your benefit. You have a secret of mine, I have a crime of yours witnessed. If my secret reaches the minister, your crime reaches the prophet, and the headline is not Snape's scandal. The headline is Senior Inquisitor drugs the boy who lived, and you will spend the rest of your small life explaining to a cell in Azkaban how the public interest was served. So, we will each keep the other's secret, you and I, out of the purest mutual loathing, which is the only treaty that has ever held between people like us. You will release my son, you will forget the word you just heard. And you will never, while you draw breath in this castle, come within 10 feet of him again. Do we understand each other, dolors? Not if we understand each other." There was a long, poisonous silence, and then dolors Umbridge, who understood power above all things and had just felt the balance of it shift decisively away from her, lowered the vial and nodded once, her face working with hatred and calculation, and said, in a voice gone tight and small, "Get out, both of you, get out of my office." Severus did not need telling twice. He crossed the room and took Harry by the shoulder, the grip hard and certain, the grip of a man laying claim, and steered him out past the frozen squad and the shattered door and into the corridor, and did not let go, did not loosen his hold for 1 second, all the way down to the dungeons, as though by keeping his hand on Harry he could undo the 3 inches that had nearly been the end of everything. In the dungeon, with the door warded and the silence laid, Severus finally let go, and turned Harry to face him and looked at him, head to foot, the assessing clinical sweep of a man checking for damage he could not see, and finding none, and not yet trusting the finding. "Did she dose you?" Severus said. "Even a drop, tell me the truth." Number Harry's voice came out unsteady. "No, you came the door you came before." He stopped. He was shaking and trying not to and failing. "You said it in front of them. You said, son. You spent all term the lie to Malfoy the goblins, keeping it sealed. Your whole life depends on nobody knowing, and you walked in and said it to Umbridge. Why would you do that? You could have got me out some other way. You're cleverer than that. You always have a colder way. Why would you?" "Because I looked through that door," Severus said, "and there was a vial 3 inches from your mouth, and in the time it would have taken me to construct a colder way you would have swallowed it. There was no colder way that was also a fast enough way. There was only the true thing said loudly at once." He was still holding himself under rigid control, and the control was visibly costing him. "Do not mistake me. It was a catastrophe of spycraft. I have spent the walk down here calculating what it will cost, and the answer is possibly everything, and I would," his voice caught, the only time Harry had ever heard it catch, "I would do it again, without the pause. That is the thing I have learned this autumn that I did not know about myself, Potter, and it is not a comfortable thing for a man in my position to learn. There is a point past which I will not calculate. You are that point. I did not choose it. It chose itself, somewhere between a hospital wing and a goblin's basin, and I find I cannot unchoose it, and I have stopped trying. Harry looked at him, this guarded, ruined, brilliant man who had just thrown 36 years of careful survival into a pink office to keep 3 drops of poison off his son's tongue. And the thing Harry had been holding back since the hospital wing, since before the hospital wing, since a cupboard under a staircase where a small boy had learned not to cry because crying made it worse, finally came up and over the wall he had built it behind. And he did not stand there and master it the way his father would have, because he was not his father. He had his mother's heart, and his mother could never look away from the people she loved. And so Harry Potter crossed the cold dungeon and put his arms around Severus Snape and held on, the way a child holds on, as he had never once in 15 years been held or held anyone, and after a moment stiffly, unpracticed, like a man relearning the use of a limb long thought lost. Severus brought his arms up and held him back. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing left to say that the holding did not say. It lasted longer than either of them would have predicted, and ended the way such things end between people unpracticed at them, by degrees, neither willing to be the one who let go first, and so both holding on past the point of comfort into something steadier. When they did step apart it was without ceremony, Severus turning at once to busy himself with the kettle so that neither of them had to look at the other's face, and Harry scrubbing his sleeve across his eyes, and the ordinary movements were a kindness they extended each other without naming it, the agreement to pretend the thing had been smaller than it was so that it could be survived. "You will not tell Miss Granger I did that," Severus said to the kettle. The walking into Umbridge's office and announcing it. "She will have constructed 7 clever plans by breakfast, and she will be insufferably correct about all of them, and I do not tonight have the constitution for being corrected by a 16-year-old. She'd probably just be glad I'm alive," Harry said. "She would be both. That is what makes her dangerous." But there was no sting in it, only the dry warmth that Harry had learned to hear underneath, and Severus poured the tea badly too strong as he made everything and handed Harry a cup, and they drank it standing in the warded dungeon while the fire burned down, 2 survivors of a near catastrophe taking the animal comfort of a hot drink and a shut door. And it was, in the bleak accountancy of the war, a good evening because they had both lived through it and were warm and were together. And that was 3 things more than most evenings of that long dark year would offer anyone. The fire ticked in the grate. Above them the castle went about its evening, Umbridge composing her hatred in a ruined office, Dumbledore recalculating in his tower, Lucius carrying his redirected suspicion toward London and a master who would eventually have to be faced. All of it still ahead, all of it still coming. But for the length of a few minutes in a warded dungeon, a father and his son stood holding each other against the whole cold arithmetic of the world, and the arithmetic for once could not reach them, and that was not nothing. After a lifetime of nothing, Harry was learning it was very nearly everything. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, The Living Register. The term wound down toward Christmas the way terms do, indifferent to the private earthquakes of the people inside it, and the castle filled with the smell of pine and the noise of trunks being dragged down staircases and the particular giddy carelessness of children about to go home. Harry watched it from a small distance, as he always had, except that this year the distance had changed its nature. He was not watching other people go home to families he did not have. This year he had somewhere to go, and the somewhere terrified him more than any duel, because a duel he understood and a home he did not. Umbridge kept to her treaty, which is to say she loathed them both with an undiminished and patient loathing and did nothing about it, because Severus had been right about the only kind of peace that holds between people like them. It was the cold equilibrium of 2 parties who each held a knife at the other's throat and had agreed, for the duration, not to push. She no longer came near Harry. She watched him in the corridors with her flat, wet eyes and said nothing, and Harry watched her back, and the not pushing went on, and it was not safety exactly, but it was a thing that would serve until the larger war made the question of Dolar's Umbridge irrelevant, which Severus assured him it eventually would, in the tone of a man who had seen many small tyrants outlived by the troubles they imagined themselves to be commanding. The arrangement for the holidays had been made without much being said, which was how the 2 of them made all their arrangements. Severus had simply remarked one evening over the pensive that he would be remaining at the castle over the break as he always did, the school being short of staff and the dungeons being his to mind, and that there was a second room in his quarters that was presently full of crates and could, with an afternoon's work, be made to contain a bed, should anyone require one who would otherwise be obliged to return to a house in Surrey. And Harry had said that he supposed someone might require one. And that had been the whole of it, the entire negotiation by which Harry Potter came, for the first time he could remember, to spend Christmas somewhere he was wanted. Ron and Hermione cornered him the night before the train, in the common room after the others had gone up, with the particular gentleness they reserved for the things Harry could not fully tell them. "So you're staying," Hermione said. It was not quite a question. With whoever it is, over Christmas." "Yeah, good," Ron said with feeling. "Sorry, the thought of you going back to those Dursleys for another Christmas, eating cold sprouts in a cupboard while that whale of a cousin gets a new computer, it does my head in. So, good, wherever you're going, as long as it's not there." "It's not there," Harry said. "It's never going to be there again, actually. That part's sorted." "For good," Hermione's eyes went bright at that, because she of all of them knew exactly what sorted for good had cost and what legal architecture now held it in place, and she did not say so because she had become, over the autumn, very practiced at carrying Harry's secrets in front of Ron without letting the weight of them show. "I'm glad," she said simply. "You deserve a Christmas that's yours. You've never had one. You should have one." "I want you both to know," Harry said, and found the words harder than he expected, because gratitude had never come easily to a boy taught that he was a burden, "that whatever happens this year, with the war, with all of it, you two are the reason I got through the autumn. You especially," to Hermione, "with the books and the law and the not pushing, you basically saved." He caught himself before the secret. "You saved more than you know." "And you," to Ron, "for covering and for not asking, and for the thing you said about how I look like I'd give the haunting back. I think about that. It helped." He cleared his throat, mortified. "Anyway, that's all. I'm rubbish at this." "Happy Christmas." "Blimey," Ron said, blinking. "He's gone soft. Whoever you're spending Christmas with, they've turned Harry Potter soft. I want to meet them just to shake their hand." And Hermione laughed wetly and threw a cushion at Ron, and the three of them sat up too late by the dying fire, and it was, Harry thought, the easiest he had felt in months, the simple animal comfort of people who loved you and asked nothing back, and he carried it down to the dungeons later like a coal to keep him warm. But before the holidays, there was a thing Harry needed to do, and he had been working up to the asking of it for a week. "I want to go to Godric's Hollow," he said on the last lesson evening of the term. I've never seen their grave. I've had two fathers my whole life, and I never knew the first thing about the real one until this autumn, and now I know, and I want to go and stand there and I don't know, say something to both of them. To my mum and to James, who, his voice did the complicated thing it did around James now, who knew I wasn't his and kept me anyway and died for me. I owe him a visit. I owe him more than a visit, and I can't do it alone. I've tried imagining doing it alone and I can't." He looked at Severus and made himself say the rest. "Will you come? I know what James was to you. I know it's the hardest possible thing I could ask, but I can't stand at that grave with both of them in the ground and only one of you." He stopped. "Will you come?" Severus was quiet a long time. The fire burned low, and Harry watched him war with it, the old hatred and the new fatherhood and the dead woman and the dead rival, all of it moving behind the dark eyes, and he almost took the asking back, and then Severus said low, "Yes, I will come. It is, as you say, the hardest possible thing you could ask, which is precisely why I will not refuse it. A man does not get to claim the easy half of a son's history and decline the rest. James Potter is part of what made you. I have spent 20 years refusing to grant him a single virtue. I find I can grant him this one. He loved your mother enough to raise her child by another man as his own and to die for him, and I, who loved her as much and did neither, am in no position to stand at his grave and sneer. So, we will go, tomorrow, before the others leave. And I will hold my tongue about him, which will cost me, and I will do it because you have asked, and because he has earned a civil silence from me at last, 15 years too late to do either of us any good." Godric's Hollow under snow was smaller than Harry had imagined, and quieter, a single street of crooked cottages and a square with a war memorial that became, when a wizard approached it, something else, a statue of a young couple and a baby, the family that had been broken here on a Hallowan a lifetime ago. Harry stood before it in the falling snow and looked at the stone version of his mother holding a stone baby, and at the stone man beside her with his arm around them both, and felt the strangeness of being the stone baby, grown, standing in the snow looking up at a monument to the worst night of his own life, which he could not remember and had never been allowed to forget. The graveyard was behind the church, and they found the stone together, the white marble gone gray with weather, the names cut clean, James Potter and Lily Potter, and the dates, and beneath them the line Harry had read about and never seen, "The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death." Snow had gathered in the cut letters. Harry knelt and brushed it out with his bare hand, clearing the names, his mother's and the name of the husband who had given it to her and to him, and he stayed there on his knees in the cold a long while, and Severus stood a little apart, giving him the distance, a thin black figure against the white, saying nothing, keeping the civil silence he had promised at a cost only Harry could guess at. "Hi, Mum," Harry said quietly to the stone. "I got your letter. Dumbledore kept it 15 years, but I got it. You wanted me to be ordinary and safe and loved, and I wasn't none of it. They made sure of that, but I am now the loved part. I'm working on it. It turns out it's hard when you've never done it before, but I'm—" He stopped and started again. "I found him, Save, the one you said would love me if he ever let himself. You were right, he let himself. It took a goblin and a blood scan and the worst year of both our lives, but he let himself, so you can stop worrying about that part. Wherever you are," he turned then to the other name, and his voice changed, gentled, went rough. "And you," he said, to James Potter cut in the gray marble. "I didn't know. All this time I thought you were my dad by blood, and it turns out you were better than that. You were my dad by choosing, which Save says is the harder kind, and I think he's right. You knew I wasn't yours, and you gave me your name anyway. You let everyone think. You died in a hallway with your wand in the wrong room so my mum could get me out, and I wasn't even, by blood I wasn't even yours, and you did it anyway without stopping to think about it, because you decided I was yours, and that was that." Harry's hand was flat on the cold stone. "I'm not going to stop calling you Dad, I want you to know that. I've got two now, which most people would say is one too many, but I went 15 years with none, so I figure I'm owed. You're my dad, he's my father, there's room for both. I worked that out, it took me a while." He swallowed. "Thank you for choosing me when you didn't have to. I'll try to be worth it. I'll try to be worth both of you." And then a thing happened that Harry would keep for the rest of his life, however long the war left him. Severus came and stood beside him at the grave. Not apart now, beside. And he looked down at the name of the rival he had hated for 20 years. The rival who had won the woman and lost the world and raised the child, and he was silent for a long moment, and then he said, not to Harry, to the stone, in a voice Harry had never heard him use, stripped of all its armor and all its irony, the voice of one father speaking to another across the only distance that could not be argued with. "You raised him well, Potter. For 15 months, and then in everything you left behind him, the friends who loved you and passed that love to him, the name that protected him, the example of a man who chose. I would not have believed it of you. I believed you arrogant and cruel and undeserving of her, and you may have been all three at 17, as was I, as we both were. But you grew into a man who took another man's son and loved him without condition, knowing the truth, asking nothing, and that is a larger thing than I managed, and I have come here, 15 years late, to say so once, where only the dead and your son can hear it. I will spend whatever the war leaves me trying to be half the father to him that you were prepared to be. It is the only apology I have, and you are past hearing it, and I am making it anyway because he asked me to come, and because you have earned it, and because I find, standing here, that I am tired of hating a dead man who did the decent thing. Rest, Potter, he is not alone now. I have him, I will keep him. You have my word, for whatever the word of Severus Snape is worth to a better man than I." It was the first time Harry had ever heard his father speak James Potter's name without the acid in it, and it undid something in him that no kindness directed at himself could have reached, because a person can armor himself against being loved long after he has given up armoring himself against grief. To hear the two men who had fathered him, one dead and one living, brought into a single quiet sentence that did not pit them against each other but laid them side by side, the chooser and the claimer, both of them his, was a thing Harry had not known he needed until it was given, and he knelt in the snow between the grave and his father and let it land. "I used to think," Harry said when he could, "that I had to pick, that if I wanted you it meant James wasn't really mine, and if I kept James it was a kind of betrayal of you, like there was only room for one. The Dursleys taught me that I think that love's a thing there's never enough of, that you have to fight your cousin for the last scrap of it." He brushed the snow once more from his mother's name. "But there's room, that's what I worked out, kneeling here. There's room for both of you, and for Mum, and for Sirius and Ron and Hermione. There's no last scrap, it's not a cupboard with one blanket. I spent 15 years rationing something that doesn't run out. Nobody ever told me it doesn't run out." He looked up at Severus, snow in his dark hair, the green eyes wet and clear. "You and James between you taught me that in about 10 minutes at a graveside took you both long enough. We are," Severus said, and there was the ghost of something almost like humor in the ruin of his voice, "neither of us famed for our timing. Your mother used to say it of me constantly. Always the right thing too late, Save. She would be insufferable about this, you understand. She would say she had told us both so." He looked down at the joined names in the gray marble, and the snow came down, and for a moment the three of them were there together in the only way the living and the dead are ever together, which is in the keeping of the people who remember them. "Come, you are cold, and the dead do not require us to freeze for them, whatever the poets pretend. We have said what there was to say. We will come back. That is the privilege the living keep that the dead surrender. We may always come back." The snow fell. The names lay clean in the gray stone. And Harry, kneeling between the grave of the father who had chosen him and the living father who had claimed him, felt the two halves of where he came from settle at last into a whole that did not cut, and the grief that had ridden him his whole life, the grief of the orphan, the child who belonged to no one, loosened its grip a single notch, which was all grief ever does and was enough. They stood there together a while longer, the father and his son, in the snow, in the quiet, and then they went home, which was a word Harry was still learning to use, to a cold dungeon and a room full of crates that was about to become his. He told Sirius 2 days before Christmas, because Sirius was his godfather and the last of the marauders who still drew breath and would never forgive being told late, and because some debts of honesty could not be deferred forever however much a person might wish to. He used the dungeon fire, with Severus gone to the staff supper and the flue opened carefully to the kitchen at Grimmauld Place, and Sirius's head appeared in the green flames, gaunt and grinning, delighted as he always was to see Harry, and as always slightly too loud, a man going quietly mad with confinement and hungry for any news from the world that had locked him away. "Harry, merry nearly Christmas, tell me everything. Tell me you've made Umbridge's life hell. Tell me you're not staying with those ghastly muggles I've been worrying." I asked Dumbledore, and he was cagey, which means, "Sirius." Harry's voice stopped him. "I have to tell you something, and it's big, and it's going to hurt, and I need you to let me get all the way through it before you start shouting, because I know you and you're going to want to shout." The grin faded. Sirius had been a hunted man for years and knew the sound of bad news arriving. "Go on," he said, quieter. "I'm listening." So Harry told him. The potion, the diagnostic, the glamour, the goblin rite, the name. He told it plainly, the way his father had taught him to set out hard facts, and he watched Sirius Black's face in the green fire pass through every stage Harry had passed through himself in the autumn, the disbelief, the denial, the rapid, horrified recalculation, and then arrive somewhere Harry had not been able to predict, because Sirius had loved James Potter more than he had loved anyone in the world, and this news did to James what nothing else could. "No," Sirius said when Harry finished. His voice had gone hoarse. "Number James was your father. I was there, Harry. I held you the day you were born." James cried. He was so happy he couldn't. The flames wavered with the shaking of him. "Snape, Snivelus, you're telling me that greasy that you came from Number. I won't have it. James was your dad. He loved your mother. He loved you. He knew." Sirius. The flames went still. "He knew," Harry said again, gently, because he had learned gentleness from the least gentle man alive and was finding uses for it everywhere. "Lily told him before they married. He knew I wasn't his by blood, and he married her anyway and gave me his name and raised me and died for me, knowing. Don't you see what that means? It doesn't make James less my dad, it makes him more. He didn't get tricked into me. He chose me. Open-eyed, knowing everything, he looked at another man's baby and decided I was his and never once let it show, not to you, not to anyone, for the rest of his life. That's the bravest thing I've ever heard. That's James. That's exactly who you've always told me he was. The one who'd do the reckless, generous, impossible thing because it was right and damn the cost. He just did it quietly the once where it mattered most." Sirius was silent a long time in the green fire, and when he spoke his voice had cracked clean open. "He never told me," he said, "his best mate. We told each other everything, and he carried that all those years on his own." A wet laugh broken. "The great Pratt, the brave, ridiculous, secretive Pratt. Of course he did. Of course he bloody did." And Harry understood that Sirius was grieving James all over again, the way you grieve the dead a second time when you learn they were larger than you knew, and he led him in the silence across the fire. "And now," Sirius said at last, gathering himself, the old fierceness coming back but changed, banked, "you're telling me you've gone and bonded yourself to Snape. Legally, by blood, the one who's made your life miserable for 5 years. The one who hates everything about." He stopped. "Harry, is he good to you? I need you to look me in the eye through this fire and tell me the truth, godfather to godson, because if he is using you, if he is cruel to you, hidden son or not, I will break out of this house and I will." "He's good to me," Harry said. "Not soft, not easy. He's the most difficult person I've ever met, and we fight, and he's got a tongue like a knife. But Sirius, he came after me. When I walked out, he came after me. Do you know how many adults in my whole life have come after me when I walked out? He tends my hand when Umbridge cuts it. He showed me Mum, a memory alive, laughing. He gave me her books with her writing in the margins. He said son to Umbridge's face, knowing it could get him killed, just to stop her hurting me. He's the first person who ever told me I was allowed to say number he's." Harry's voice steadied into the truest thing he had. "He's my father, Sirius. James is my dad. I've got room for both. And I need you, I really need you, to not make me choose, because everybody else in my life has spent 15 years deciding things about me without asking, and you're the one person who never has, and I'm asking you now, please, let me have this. Let me have both of them, for me, not for him. I know you'll never do anything for him, do it for me." And Sirius Black, who had spent 12 years in Azkaban with his hatred to keep him warm, who would have happily gone to his grave loathing Severus Snape, looked at his godson's face in the green fire, the face that had begun to change, that had James's nerve and Lily's eyes, and now, undeniably, a sharper line settling into the brow that came from somewhere else, and he did the hardest thing Harry had ever asked of anyone. "All right," Sirius said hoarse, "all right, for you. Not for him, never for him. I'll hex him on sight at the First Order meeting and you can't stop me." But a broken grin, the old Sirius surfacing through the grief. "If he makes you safe, Harry. If he gives you a Christmas that isn't a cupboard. If he came after you when you walked out, which is more than he didn't finish it. Then I'll try. I'll grit my teeth and I'll try, because you're James's son and Lily's son and apparently Snape's son. You greedy boy, 3 for the price of 1. And all 3 of those people would want you happy more than they'd want anything, including me getting to keep my grudge. So, have your Christmas, both your dad. And Harry," the flames flickered, "tell him from me that if he ever makes you cry, there isn't a dungeon deep enough. He'll know what I mean. Merry Christmas, kid. I'm glad you're not in that cupboard. I'm glad somebody's finally—" His voice went, and he covered it with bluster. "Right, that's enough soppiness for one war. Go on before someone catches you on this fire. Go and have your Christmas." The flames guttered out, and Harry knelt before the cold grate a while, having just done the second hardest honest thing of his autumn, and found that it had cost him and been worth it, the way the true things always were. The first family Christmas was not easy, because nothing about the two of them was easy, and Harry would not have trusted it if it had been. They quarreled on the second day over something so small that neither of them could afterward reconstruct its origin, a remark about Harry's carelessness with a knife. A flash of the old contempt in Severus's voice, a flash of the old defiance in Harry's, and for one ugly minute they were teacher and despised student again, the autumn's progress nowhere to be found, both of them retreating into the armor that had kept them alive and apart for 5 years. Harry slammed out of the quarters and stood in the cold corridor and thought, with the bleak certainty of the cupboard, of course. Of course it was too good. It always falls apart. You always ruin it. And then a thing happened that had never happened in the cupboard, never once in 15 years. The door opened and the adult came after him. Severus stood in the doorway, stiff, furious with himself more than with Harry, and said into the cold corridor, "I am not, it transpires, very good at this. I have spent 36 years perfecting the art of driving people away before they can leave me, and it is a difficult habit to break in a fortnight, and I broke faith with it just now, and I am," the word still came hard, but it came, "I am sorry. You were not careless with the knife, or you were but no more than any boy, and it did not warrant what I said, and what I said was the old poison talking, the reflex, the thing I reach for when I am frightened of how much a thing matters to me. You matter to me, that frightens me. I turn fright into cruelty, it is my oldest and worst trick. I am telling you this so that the next time I do it, and there will be a next time, you will know it for what it is, the trick and not the truth, and you will not believe the cruelty, because the cruelty is the lie and the staying is the truth." He stood aside from the door. "Come back in. It is cold and I have made tea badly, and there is a thing your mother used to do at Christmas that I have not done in 30 years and have decided, against my better judgment, to attempt, and I would like you to be there for the attempting, even if it fails, which it likely will." And Harry came back in because the door had opened and the adult had come after him. And that one fact rewrote in a single stroke more of the cupboard's old lessons than a year of kindness could have. And they drank the bad tea, and Severus attempted the thing Lily used to do, which turned out to be a particular charm that filled the air with drifting points of cold light like snow that did not fall. A useless, beautiful thing she had loved, and it half worked, the lights guttering and uneven. And Harry watched his father's face in the wavering glow, attempting his dead mother's Christmas magic for the son she had left behind, and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that the attempt did not say. On Christmas morning there were presents which neither of them was practiced at. Harry gave Severus a new set of brewing knives, the good kind, the kind Severus would never have bought himself, and Severus received them with a gruffness that Harry had learned to read as the opposite of indifferent. And Severus gave Harry a parcel that turned out to be the rest of Lily's books, all of them, the charms and the potions and the book of Muggle poems he had never understood, the whole small library of a dead woman's marginalia, handed over not one at a time as he had said he could only manage, but all at once, which Harry understood to be the largest gift Severus was capable of giving, the parting with all of her at once, into the keeping of the only person who would understand what they were. "You said you could only give them one at a time," Harry said. "I lied," Severus said. "I find I can give them all at once to you this morning. It transpires that the giving is easier when the person you are giving them to is." He paused and chose the word with the care of a man handling something that might break family. "They were always going to be yours. I am simply done pretending I need them more than you do. I do not. I have the things she actually left. The books are only paper. You are the part that mattered." Later that day, with the cold light failing early at the high slit window and the drift of useless, beautiful snow lights guttering on and off as Severus practiced the charm in odd moments without admitting he was practicing it, they talked properly for the first time about the thing neither of them had been willing to name. "It's still coming," Harry said into the quiet. He was on the floor by the fire with one of his mother's potions books open on his knees, arguing with her marginalia in fresh ink as she would have wanted. "The war, Voldemort, the prophecy you said Dumbledore won't tell me. None of this fixes that. I could do all of this, the right, the books, the family, and still have to walk into something at the end of it that I don't come back from. We both know it. He as good as told you." He did. Severus did not insult him with comfort. He sat in his chair with a glass he was actually drinking from tonight, a single measure, a concession to the day. "The war is coming and the prophecy is real, whatever its words, and I will not pretend to you that a father's love is a shield against a thing that killed your mother despite the strongest love there is. It is not. Love did not save Lily. It saved you through her, but it did not save her, and I will not sell you the lie that it will save you, because you are not a child to be comforted with lies. You are my son, and you have earned the truth, which is the only inheritance I have found worth giving." "Then what's the point?" Harry said, not bitter, just asking, the way you ask a thing you genuinely want answered. "If it doesn't change the ending, if I still might have to." He didn't finish. What was all this for? Severus was quiet a moment, turning the glass. "I have thought about this a great deal," he said, "because I asked myself the same question in the autumn, lying awake. What is the use of becoming a father to a boy the world intends to spend? Would it not be kinder for both of us to keep the distance so that the spending when it comes costs less?" He set the glass down, and I concluded that it is the wrong question. The ending is not ours to choose. Dumbledore is right about that much. The prophecy will ask what it asks, but the walking toward it is ours. He raised you to walk toward your death alone, unloved, with nothing pulling the other way, because he judged that an unloved boy would walk more readily. And what we have done, you and I, with the right and the books and this absurd snow that will not fall, is change what you walk as, not whether. As you will walk toward whatever is coming as a person who is loved, who has a father waiting, who has a reason of his own to come back and not merely a duty to go forward. And a person who walks toward the dark wanting to live, Potter, with everything to lose, fights differently than a person who walks toward it already half gone, harder, cleverer, with more to spend and a fiercer reason to spend it well. He looked at his son in the firelight. "I cannot change the ending. I can change who meets it, and I have decided that is worth doing, even if it costs us both more grief at the end than the distance would have. Because the alternative is to let him have his way, to let you go to it, the empty, unloved instrument he built, and I will not. I would rather grieve a son I love than protect myself by failing to love him. That is the whole of my answer. It is not comforting. It is the truest thing I have." Harry was quiet, the firelight moving over the pages of his mother's book. "That's the most words you've ever said to me at once," he managed, finally, his voice not quite steady. "Do not grow accustomed to it," Severus said, but there was no edge in it, and the snowlights guttered and steadied over the two of them, uneven and beautiful and trying. A dead woman's small magic kept alive in a cold dungeon by the two people she had loved most in the world, neither of whom she had lived to see become a family, and who had become one anyway, late and hard and against every plan laid to prevent it. "I'm glad we did it," Harry said. "All of it, even if the ending's bad. I'd rather have had this than not, whatever happens." "So would I," Severus said, and it cost him nothing to say, which was how Harry knew, more than by any other thing in the whole long autumn, that it was true. There was one more thing, and Harry did it of his own accord in the new year without telling Severus until it was done, because some things a person had to do for himself. He went to Madam Pomfrey in the hospital wing on a quiet afternoon, and he asked her to run the lineage diagnostic again, the full one. The same charm that had torn the lie open in October. Pomfrey looked at him for a long moment, this boy she had patched up a dozen times across 5 years, whose blood had frightened her so badly in the autumn that she had not slept for a week, and she understood, being a wise woman, what he was asking for and why, and she did not argue. She laid out the long strip of pale parchment, and she passed her wand the length of him, crown to heel, and the charm filled the parchment in its cramped, indifferent hand, the running ledger of a body, and this time, when it reached the line that had stopped them both in October, it did not stop. Maternal line, Lily J. Evans, deceased, confirmed. Paternal line, Severus Snape living, confirmed. No glamour detected, no concealment present, record clean, no false in flat capitals, no glamour decaying, no shadow of a lie under the truth. Just the two names, his mother and his father, the real ones, recorded plainly, the way they should have been recorded 15 years ago, the way they would have been if a man with blue eyes and good intentions had not decided that a child's whole self was a variable to be managed. The lie was struck from the register. What stood in its place was simply true, and could be read by anyone and frightened no one, and was his. Harry held the parchment in his scarred hand, the right one, the one that said I must not tell lies, and the one with the thin white line of the right across the palm, and he read his own true lineage in the charm's flat, honest hand, and the thing he felt did not have a dramatic name. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of a thing finally sitting in its proper place after 15 years askew, the feeling of a record set straight, of a boy who had been one thing in the books and another thing in his blood becoming, at last, the same thing in both. He was Harry, son of Lily, son of Severus. It was written down now where the glamour had been. It was true on the parchment and true in his face, which had finished its slow changing, and true in the white scar on his palm, and true in the cold dungeon 2 floors down where his father was at this moment marking essays and waiting, though he would never admit to waiting, for his son to come home from wherever he had got to. Thank you, Harry said to Pomfrey, and folded the parchment, and added it to the small archive against his chest, beside his mother's letter and the worn pages of her books, the whole record of who he was, no longer a secret, no longer a lie, no longer anyone's to rearrange. You're welcome, Mr. Potter, Pomfrey said, and then, because she was a wise woman and had watched the whole terrible autumn from her quiet ward and had a sense of how stories ought to end, she corrected herself gently, the first person in the castle to say it aloud and mean it as a simple fact rather than a scandal or a weapon. Or Mr. Snape, I suppose, if you like, whichever you prefer. It is, after all, entirely your choice now. That is rather the whole point of what the two of you did, isn't it? That it is finally, after everything, your choice. Harry thought about it standing in the hospital wing where it had all begun, where a torn glamour and a frightened nurse and a man gone white to the knuckle had cracked his whole life open in a single line of a healer's scrawl. He thought about the child who had woken in that bed in October, who had belonged to no one and been told it was for his own protection, who had built himself out of grief and a cupboard and a name that turned out to be borrowed. And he thought about the choice he had made in a goblin's chamber with his blood running into another man's, freely, with both eyes open, the first thing in his whole life that no one had decided for him. Potter, he said. I'll keep Potter for James, who chose me when he didn't have to. A pause and the crooked ghost of a smile he had learned from his father. But I'll answer to the other, too. When he's the one calling, he's earned it, we both have. He went down the stairs, 2 floors down, to the cold dungeon that had become the warmest place he knew, where the door would open before he reached it because the person inside had grown, against every habit of his guarded, ruined life, into someone who listened for a particular footstep on the stair. And he went home to his father in the middle of a war that was still coming, with the whole truth of himself written plainly in his pocket, and no one left in the world with the power to take it from him. And that, after 15 years of having everything taken, was not the end of the story, because the war was real and the prophecy was real, and the hardest roads were still ahead of both of them. But it was the end of the lie, and the end of the lie, Harry was learning, was where the rest of a life could finally begin. Chapter 7 end.